My phone rang at exactly 5:12 in the morning. The screen flashed my sister Sienna and her husband Preston calling. When I answered the call, her voice was completely devoid of emotion. "Mom died last night," she said, clipping her words with a chilling calmness. Her heart gave out. "And just so we are clear, she left everything to me and my husband. You get absolutely nothing." Before I could even process the cruelty of her words, my brother-in-law Preston snatched the phone. His smug, arrogant laugh echoed through the speaker. "Finally you are out, Zuri. No more handouts for the family failure. We are taking the estate. Do not even bother showing up to the memorial." I did not scream. I did not cry. Instead, I calmly tapped the speakerphone button and set the device on my granite kitchen counter. I looked across the island. My mother Brenda was sitting right there, perfectly healthy, taking a slow sip of her morning espresso. She leaned toward the phone, her eyes narrowing with a fury I had never seen before. "I am not dead yet, you greedy parasites," she snarled. The line went dead instantly. "Before I tell you how my own sister and her husband tried to fake our mother's death to steal a $20 million real estate empire, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. If you have ever had toxic family members try to destroy you, hit that like button and subscribe. You will want to hear every single detail of how I made them lose absolutely everything." The silence in my kitchen was deafening after the call dropped. My mother set her coffee mug down with a sharp clink against the stone counter. She stared at the phone, her chest heaving, as the absolute reality of her oldest daughter's betrayal settled into the room. For 34 years, I was considered the disappointment of our prominent Atlanta family. I was the rebellious younger daughter who completely refused to pursue medicine to satisfy their upper-class image. I chose finance. I chose venture capital. I built my own wealth quietly in the shadows while Sienna flaunted her country club memberships and designer bags on social media. Sienna and Preston were the golden couple of Atlanta high society. Preston was a high-profile estate lawyer who came from old white money. Sienna was a socialite obsessed with her online image. They looked flawless on the outside, but I knew the absolute truth about their rotting reality. My phone vibrated against the counter, breaking the heavy tension. A text message from Preston illuminated the screen. "Nice try, Zuri. I know all about artificial intelligence voice cloning. You are deeply sick. The death certificate is already signed. I am the legal executor of the estate now. Do not try to extort us, or I will have you arrested for fraud." I read the message aloud to my mother. She let out a harsh, bitter laugh. "Fraud," she repeated. "He has the absolute nerve to talk about fraud after what he just did." "Mom," I said, gently taking a seat across from her. "Tell me exactly what happened at that facility." Brenda took a deep breath, adjusting the silk robe she had borrowed from my closet. 2 days ago, she had experienced a minor transient ischemic attack, which is a mini-stroke. It was frightening, but the doctors at the main hospital assured us she would make a full recovery with proper rest and medication. Sienna and Preston had rushed into the hospital playing the roles of the devoted daughter and the caring son-in-law. They absolutely insisted on moving Brenda to a private, exclusive recovery facility on the outskirts of Atlanta. They claimed it was for her ultimate safety and comfort. "I thought they actually cared," Brenda said, her voice shaking with a terrible mixture of heartbreak and rage. "I really thought my firstborn daughter loved me. But last night, everything changed. I woke up incredibly thirsty around 2 in the morning. I walked out into the dim hallway to find a nurse for some water. Instead, I saw Preston standing near the emergency exit staircase. He was talking in hushed tones to Dr. Evans, the attending physician. I stayed hidden behind the doorway and listened to every single word." Brenda recounted the conversation word for exact word. Preston had handed the doctor a thick manila envelope that was clearly bulging with cash. "The cash is all there," Preston had told the corrupt doctor. "Just file the cardiac arrest report and sign the official death certificate by morning. My wife and I will handle the immediate cremation so there is no body left to examine. No autopsy, no questions asked." Dr. Evans had hesitated nervously, but Preston pushed him harder. "She is an older woman with a known heart condition," Preston had argued. "Nobody is going to blink an eye. We need her commercial properties transferred to our holding company immediately." If you do not sign it, I will personally pull the funding for your new private practice and ruin your career." Brenda realized in that terrifying moment that her own life was in immediate danger. They were not just stealing her valuable assets, they were erasing her very existence. She did not wait for the doctor to respond or negotiate further. She crept back to her room on trembling legs, gathered her purse and her phone, and slipped out through the ground floor staff exit. She walked 2 miles in the freezing dark until she reached a gas station and called a private car service to bring her straight to my penthouse. She knew I was the only person in the entire world who could truly protect her from them. Listening to her, a cold, calculating anger washed over my entire body. Preston had always looked down on me. He made racist microaggressions disguised as jokes at every single Thanksgiving dinner. He called my investment career a cute little hobby because he could not fathom a young black woman outsmarting him in the financial sector. He thought he was completely untouchable because he was a wealthy lawyer with deep connections in the local government. I thought he could exploit an older woman and steal the commercial real estate she had spent 30 years building from the ground up. My mother owned a massive block of premium commercial land in downtown Atlanta. It was worth at least $20 million. Sienna and Preston wanted that land desperately, and they were willing to fake a death to get their hands on it. "I need to call the police right now," Brenda said, reaching frantically for my phone. "I need to call the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the medical board, everyone. I am going to put my own daughter and her husband in a jail cell today." I placed my hand firmly over hers, stopping her movements entirely. "Mom, look at me," I said. My voice was completely steady and empty of any panic. "If you call the police right now, what actually happens? They arrest Preston for bribing a doctor and faking a document. With his extensive legal connections, he will claim it is a massive misunderstanding. He will hire a shark defense attorney. He will probably negotiate a plea deal and get a suspended sentence. He loses his law license, but he stays completely out of prison. Sienna will play the victim and cry to the judge saying Preston manipulated her into going along with it. They will get a slap on the wrist and walk away free." Brenda stared at me, the anger in her eyes shifting into a sharp, focused clarity. She knew I was completely right. Preston knew exactly how to play the local legal system better than anyone else in Atlanta. "So what do we do?" she asked, her voice dropping to a whisper. "We let them dig a much deeper grave, Mom." I smiled, feeling the familiar adrenaline of a hostile corporate takeover coursing through my veins. "Right now, they think you are actually dead. They think they have full, unobstructed control of your entire estate. Preston is acting reckless and desperate. You do not bribe a medical professional with a bag of cash unless you are drowning in serious debt. I bet he owes a massive amount of money to the absolute wrong people. If we stay perfectly quiet, they will try to sell your property fast. They will move millions of dollars across state lines. They will commit wire fraud, mail fraud, and tax evasion. Those are serious federal crimes, Mom. We are going to step back and let them commit federal crimes. And when our trap snaps shut, they will lose absolutely everything they value." My mother leaned back in her plush leather chair. The immense heartbreak of her daughter's betrayal was still visibly hurting her, but it was being rapidly replaced by the same fierce, relentless determination that had allowed her to build her real estate empire in the first place. "What is our first step?" she asked, trusting my judgment completely. "First, you are going to stay hidden right here in my penthouse," I instructed. "No phone calls, no checking your social media accounts, no stepping out onto the balcony where someone might see you. You are officially a ghost. Second, I am going to let them think they have completely won this game. Let Sienna post her fake crocodile tears on social media. Let Preston strut around town thinking he is the smartest man in Atlanta. I will play the role of the devastated, estranged sister who has been cut out of the will." I walked over to the expansive floor-to-ceiling windows of my living room, looking down at the awakening city of Atlanta. The morning sun was just beginning to reflect off the glass skyscrapers downtown. Most of those towering buildings housed the massive financial institutions I dealt with daily. My wealth was quiet, hidden securely in blind trusts and anonymous corporate entities. Sienna and Preston thought I was struggling financially. They thought I lived in this magnificent penthouse because I was renting it and barely making ends meet. They had absolutely no idea that my investment firm owned this entire luxury building. For years, I had patiently endured their constant insults. I had sat silently at family dinners while Sienna bragged endlessly about her husband's legal victories and her lavish overseas vacations. I had swallowed my pride when Preston made passive-aggressive comments about my life choices. I had let them build their arrogant, fragile reality because I valued my peace of mind over seeking their validation. But this situation was entirely different. They had tried to dispose of my own mother purely for financial gain. They crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. I pulled out my secure laptop and opened my encrypted communication servers. I kept a highly skilled team of private investigators and forensic accountants on retainer for my venture capital firm. It was finally time to put their skills to personal use. I sent a highly secure message to my lead investigator. I need a complete, comprehensive financial background check on Preston Hayes. I want to know about every single bank account, every hidden offshore trust, every gambling debt, and every dangerous person he owes money to. Dig deeper than you ever have before. Do not leave a single stone unturned and report directly back to me. As I hit the send button, my phone vibrated loudly against the counter again. It was another text message from Sienna. We are organizing a small exclusive memorial service at the country club next week. You are explicitly not invited. If you try to show your face, security will immediately escort you off the premises. We are completely done with you, Zuri. I read the message aloud to my mother and chuckled softly. You are exactly right, Sienna, I whispered to the empty room. We are completely done. But this show is just beginning. The morning sun continued its slow climb over the Atlanta skyline, but the warmth did not reach the cold reality settling inside my penthouse. My mother Brenda sat perfectly still on the velvet sofa, staring out at the city she had helped build through decades of hard work and commercial real estate. The physical toll of the transient ischemic attack she suffered 2 days ago was finally catching up to her. Her hands trembled slightly as she held the porcelain coffee cup, and the exhaustion in her eyes was impossible to hide. She needed proper medical attention immediately. The corrupt doctor at the nursing facility had clearly neglected her actual health in favor of Preston and his envelope of cash. I walked over and gently took the empty cup from her shaking hands. We are going to the doctor, I said, my voice leaving absolutely no room for debate. But not to any hospital where Preston might have connections or spies. We are going to a private concierge medical facility in Buckhead. They operate entirely off the grid of standard hospital networks and prioritize absolute patient discretion above everything else. My mother nodded slowly, leaning on my arm as I helped her up. She looked around my expansive apartment, taking in the original artwork and the custom Italian furniture. You have built quite a fortress here, Zuri, she murmured, her voice thick with emotion. I never truly understood why you pushed us all away, but seeing how you protect yourself, I understand it now. I just wish I had seen the truth about Sienna before it came to this. We took the private elevator down to the secure underground parking garage. My personal driver was already waiting beside my black sports utility vehicle, with the engine running and the climate control set perfectly. The drive to Buckhead was quiet. I watched my mother stare out the tinted windows, looking at the streets of Atlanta, as if she were a ghost, observing a world she no longer belonged to. In the eyes of the law, thanks to Preston and his forged documents, she was exactly that, a ghost. We pulled up to the discreet entrance of the Premier Wellness Institute. There were no glaring red emergency signs or crowded waiting rooms. Instead, it looked like a high-end spa with polished marble floors, towering indoor waterfalls, and a serene atmosphere designed specifically for the ultra-wealthy elite of Georgia. The concierge team greeted us immediately, offering alkaline water and warm towels. I guided my mother to the plush seating area while I approached the polished mahogany reception desk to handle the intake paperwork. The receptionist, a well-dressed woman with a flawless smile, typed my mother's information into her secure terminal. We just need to verify the primary insurance and keep a credit card on file for any incidentals, she explained politely. My mother, who had walked up to stand beside me, reached into her designer handbag and pulled out her premium platinum health insurance card and her primary black titanium bank card. She handed them over with the quiet dignity of a woman who had spent 30 years never having a single card declined. The receptionist swiped the insurance card first. She paused, her perfectly groomed eyebrows pulling together in a tight frown. She typed something quickly into her keyboard and tried scanning the card again. "I am so sorry, Mrs. Hayes, the receptionist said, her voice dropping to a discreet whisper. "The system is throwing a highly unusual error code. It says this policy has been permanently canceled and the account is locked due to deceased status." My mother physically recoiled as if she had been struck across the face. She gripped the edge of the mahogany desk to steady herself, her breathing suddenly shallow and rapid. "Deceased," she whispered, the horrific reality of her daughter's actions hitting her all over again. The receptionist looked deeply uncomfortable but maintained her professional demeanor. "There must be a clerical error in the national database," she offered kindly. "Let us just use the credit card for the deposit today, and you can sort out the insurance error with your provider later." She took my mother's primary bank card and inserted the chip into the terminal. A loud, sharp beep echoed through the quiet lobby. The machine flashed a bright red error message. The receptionist tried again, manually entering the numbers. The result was exactly the same. "I am incredibly sorry," the receptionist stammered now, looking at us with a mixture of pity and extreme confusion. "The bank has placed a hard freeze on this account. It says the assets are currently locked in probate. Do you happen to have another form of payment?" My mother looked completely broken. The woman who owned tens of millions of dollars in commercial real estate, the woman who had donated wings to local libraries and funded community centers, was standing in a medical lobby, entirely stripped of her identity and her assets. Sienna and Preston had not wasted a single second. The ink on that forged death certificate was barely dry, and they had already moved to seize total control of her entire life. They had marched into the banks and the insurance companies, playing the roles of the grieving family members, while legally erasing my mother from existence. "Do not worry, Mom," I said, my voice perfectly level and calm. I stepped in front of her, shielding her from the receptionist's pitying gaze. I reached into my structured leather tote bag and pulled out a heavy, solid metal card. It was an exclusive Centurion black card, offered by invitation only to individuals with extraordinary liquid wealth. I placed it softly on the marble counter. "Use this for all charges," I instructed the receptionist. "I want the comprehensive executive health screening, a full neurological workup and MRI, and whatever the leading cardiologist recommends. Put everything on this account, and keep an open tab for the duration of her care here." The receptionist looked at the heavy black card, and her entire demeanor shifted from polite confusion to absolute deference. "Certainly, Mrs. Hayes," she said, immediately processing the transaction. "The payment cleared in less than a second. We will take excellent care of her today. Please have a seat, and the medical director will be right with you." I guided my mother back to the velvet sofa. Her hands were covering her face, and she was silently weeping. It was not about the money. It was about the profound violation of trust. Her own flesh and blood had systematically dismantled her life before she even had a chance to eat breakfast. "I need to make a quick phone call," I told her softly, rubbing her shoulder. "You are safe here, Mom. Nobody can touch you." I stepped away, walking down a quiet corridor lined with abstract paintings. I pulled out my phone and dialed a highly secure private number. It rang exactly twice before a crisp, professional voice answered. "Sterling Wealth Management, this is David speaking." "David, it is Zuri," I said, keeping my voice low but commanding. "I need you to immediately authorize a blanket approval for any and all medical expenses coming from the Premier Wellness Institute in Atlanta over the next month. Do not flag any massive transactions from this location." "Absolutely, Zuri," David replied, his tone shifting to immediate attention. "I will clear the security protocols right now. Is everything all right with your health?" "I am perfectly fine," I answered, pacing the carpeted hallway. "But I need to confirm my current liquidity. What is our status on the Silicon Valley acquisitions we closed last week?" The healthcare software startup was successfully acquired by the major tech conglomerate yesterday afternoon, David reported efficiently. Your venture capital firm netted a clean profit of $42 million on that single exit. The funds have been successfully routed through your anonymous holding companies and are currently resting in your primary offshore trust. Your overall liquid assets across all portfolios are sitting comfortably north of $250 million. Excellent, I murmured, a cold smile touching my lips. Keep the aggressive investment strategies on hold for the next 30 days. I need a massive amount of liquid capital ready to deploy at a moment's notice. I am preparing to execute a hostile takeover right here in Atlanta, and it is going to be incredibly personal. Understood completely, David said, never questioning my directives. The funds are mobilized and waiting for your command. Just say the word, Zuri. I ended the call and walked back toward the lobby. My mother was already being escorted by 2 nurses toward the executive medical suites. She looked back at me, her eyes silently thanking me for the protection she never expected me to provide. For years, Sienna had been the daughter who flaunted wealth, but it was all an illusion built on our mother's hard work and Preston's shady legal dealings. They were living far beyond their actual means, drowning in luxury car leases and country club dues. I was the one holding the actual power. The silent billionaire daughter they had spent a lifetime treating like an absolute joke. I sat down on the velvet sofa and opened my laptop to check my secure emails. That is when my phone vibrated in my pocket. The screen illuminated with a new text message. It was from Sienna. I stared at the notification for a long moment before opening the message. I could practically hear her arrogant, whiny voice reading the words aloud in my head. Zuri, just thought you should know that Preston and I have officially locked down the entire estate. The bank accounts are frozen, the properties are secured, and the legal transition is moving smoothly. The lawyers agree that your complete lack of involvement in the family business means you forfeit any rights to the assets. We are handling the burden of Mom's massive debts now. Please do not embarrass yourself by trying to contest this in court. You do not have the money to fight us, and Preston will absolutely destroy you in front of a judge. Stay out of our way. I read the message twice, analyzing every single word of her delusional fantasy. She really thought she had won. She really believed that because I drove an unassuming car and did not post designer labels on the internet, I was a helpless broke failure who would just roll over and let them steal millions of dollars. They had completely bought into their own lies. I did not reply to the message. I did not need to. Replying would only give them the satisfaction of knowing they had gotten under my skin. Instead, I took a screenshot of the text and forwarded it directly to my lead corporate attorney with a simple instruction attached. Save this for the federal fraud indictment. I leaned back into the comfortable sofa, crossing my legs and taking a deep breath of the lavender-scented air in the clinic. A genuine smile finally spread across my face. The trap was perfectly set. Sienna and Preston were marching blindly into a financial and legal bloodbath entirely of their own making. They thought they were burying our mother, but they were actually digging a massive, inescapable grave for themselves. And I was going to happily supply the dirt. The heavy mahogany doors of the Premier Wellness Institute closed silently behind me as I left my mother in the absolute best medical care money could buy. My driver navigated the sleek black vehicle through the winding tree-lined streets of Buckhead, heading back toward the heart of downtown Atlanta. The city moved in a blur of glass and steel outside my tinted windows, but my mind was completely still. I was calculating every possible variable in the impending war. Preston and Sienna had moved with reckless speed to freeze the bank accounts, which meant they were desperate. Desperate people make catastrophic mistakes. They do not verify facts. They operate on pure assumption and arrogant entitlement. I knew exactly what their next move would be. They would try to seize physical assets. My penthouse occupied the entire top floor of the Sapphire Tower, one of the most exclusive luxury high-rises in the city. It featured private elevator access, floor-to-ceiling panoramic windows, and an extensive security system that rivaled most banking institutions. Preston had only been up here once for a brief holiday dinner 2 years ago. I remember the way his eyes had darted around the expansive space, calculating the square footage and analyzing the imported Italian marble countertops. He had made a snide comment to Sienna right in front of me, saying it was a shame my mother was wasting so much of her hard-earned wealth subsidizing my lavish lifestyle. He had completely convinced himself that Brenda bought the penthouse for her deadbeat daughter. It was easier for his fragile ego to believe I was a freeloading charity case than to accept the reality that I was entirely self-made. I arrived back at the tower and stepped into the private elevator, scanning my biometric credentials. The doors slid open directly into my formal entryway. The space was silent and serene. I walked into the massive chef's kitchen, poured myself a glass of sparkling water and waited. I did not have to wait very long. Exactly 47 minutes after I returned home, the internal alert chimes of my security system echoed softly through the living room. I walked over to the digital control panel mounted on the wall and pulled up the exterior hallway camera feed. Stepping out of the service elevator because my private elevator required a secure key fob was Preston. He was wearing a sharply tailored navy blue suit that looked slightly wrinkled, as if he had been sweating through it all morning. Beside him stood a heavily built uniformed man with a silver star pinned to his chest. The county sheriff. Preston adjusted his silk tie and puffed out his chest, trying to project an aura of absolute legal authority. He raised his fist and began pounding aggressively on my custom oak door. The heavy thuds echoed loudly, deliberately designed to intimidate. He was trying to create a scene to embarrass me in front of my wealthy neighbors. He did not realize the entire floor belonged exclusively to me. I took a slow sip of my water, set the glass down and walked to the door. I pulled the heavy handle open, swinging it wide to reveal Preston standing there with a smug, predatory grin plastered across his face. "Well, well, well," Preston sneered, his voice dripping with condescension. "The grieving daughter is finally home. I hope you have some moving boxes, Zuri, because your free ride is officially over." I did not say a word to him. I shifted my gaze to the uniformed officer, standing awkwardly slightly behind Preston's shoulder. "Good afternoon, officer," I said, my voice perfectly calm and polite. "How can I help you today?" The sheriff cleared his throat, looking a bit uncomfortable with Preston's theatrical hostility. "Ma'am, I am here to serve an official notice of immediate eviction. Mr. Hayes here is the legal executor of the Brenda Hayes estate, and he has filed the necessary paperwork to reclaim this property on behalf of the deceased's holdings." Preston thrust a thick stack of legal documents toward my chest. I did not reach out to take them, letting them flutter awkwardly in his hand, until he was forced to step forward and slap them against the doorframe. "Do not try to play dumb with me," Zuri, Preston barked, leaning in close. "I smell the desperation on you. Sienna and I have fully audited the estate this morning. We know Brenda bought this multi-million-dollar penthouse to keep you off the streets. It is honestly pathetic. You are 34 years old, playing pretend in a luxury apartment funded entirely by your mother's hard work. Well, the Bank of Brenda is permanently closed. The estate needs to liquidate this asset immediately to cover her remaining medical debts and probate costs. You have exactly 1 hour to pack whatever clothes you can carry and vacate the premises. The sheriff is here to ensure you do not steal any fixtures or valuable art on your way out." I leaned against the doorframe, crossing my arms loosely over my chest. I looked at Preston, examining the dark circles under his eyes and the slight tremor in his fingers. He was projecting extreme confidence, but the physical signs of absolute panic were betraying him. He needed to sell this penthouse fast, because whoever he owed money to was likely breathing heavily down his neck. "Preston," I said softly, almost gently, "are you genuinely out of your mind, or just severely uneducated in basic property law?" His face flushed a deep, angry red. "Do not speak to me like that, you freeloading failure," he spat, his voice rising in volume. "You have spent your entire life being a massive disappointment to your family. Sienna went to law school. I built a prestigious legal career. We represent the absolute pinnacle of Black excellence in Atlanta. And what do you represent, Zuri? Nothing. You are a stain on your mother's legacy. You contribute absolutely nothing to society. You hide in this apartment living off handouts while we do the real work. I am sick and tired of subsidizing your lazy lifestyle. The locks are being changed today." He turned to the sheriff, puffing out his chest again. "Officer, please escort this trespasser off the property." She has no legal right to be here. The sheriff stepped forward, pulling a pair of handcuffs from his belt, just in case things escalated. Ma'am, I need you to step out into the hallway, he said firmly. The executor has the legal documentation. If you refuse to leave voluntarily, I will have to remove you by force. I completely ignored Preston's racist microaggressions and his delusional speech about black excellence. I uncrossed my arms and looked directly into the sheriff's eyes. Officer, before you make a terrible mistake that could cost you your badge and your pension, I need you to do me a very small favor. I need you to look at the name of the property owner listed on that eviction notice Mr. Hayes just handed you. The sheriff frowned, looking down at the paperwork in Preston's hand. It says the Brenda Hayes estate, he read aloud. Exactly, I smiled, my voice dropping to a dangerously quiet pitch. Now, Mr. Hayes claims to be an expert real estate attorney, so he should know that before filing an emergency eviction with the county courts, one must properly verify the actual title and deed of the property through the municipal database. It is a matter of public record. Preston scoffed, rolling his eyes. I know exactly what the records say. The property is held in a blind trust. Brenda set it up to hide her financial support of you because she was deeply ashamed of your inability to provide for yourself. I have the executor rights to all her blind trusts. It is over, Zuri. Stop stalling. Hold on just one moment, officer, I said, stepping back into my foyer. I walked over to a sleek console table and opened the top drawer. Inside was a heavy leather-bound folder containing my most vital corporate documents. I pulled out a thick stack of papers complete with raised notary seals and official state watermarks. I walked back to the door and handed the heavy folder directly to the sheriff, completely bypassing Preston. Officer, please read the actual registered deed for this property, I instructed calmly. The county updated these records 5 years ago. Preston crossed his arms, an arrogant smirk still playing on his lips as the sheriff opened the folder. The officer flipped through the first few pages, his eyes scanning the dense legal text. Suddenly the sheriff stopped, his brow furrowed in deep confusion. He looked from the document to Preston and then back to me. Mr. Hayes, the sheriff said, his voice suddenly losing all of its previous authority. This deed does not say the Brenda Hayes estate. It says this property is entirely owned by Obsidian Holdings, Limited Liability Company. Preston snatched the folder out of the sheriff's hands violently. What are you talking about? He demanded, his eyes darting frantically across the pages. This is a fake. This is a complete forgery. You forged this to steal your mother's property. Read the next page. Preston, I suggested, my voice practically dripping with poison. Read the corporate registration details for Obsidian Holdings. Preston flipped the page. The color immediately drained from his face, leaving him looking like a sickly shade of gray. His mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. His hands began to shake so violently that the heavy legal papers rattled against each other. The sheriff leaned over Preston's shoulder to read the document. Obsidian Holdings Limited Liability Company. The sheriff read aloud the words, echoing harshly in the quiet hallway. Sole managing director and majority shareholder is Zuri Hayes. The silence that followed was absolutely deafening. Preston stared at the paper as if it were written in a foreign language. His arrogant brain simply could not process the information in front of him. Allow me to clarify this for you, Preston. Since your legal education seems to have completely failed you, I said, stepping out into the hallway and backing him against the wall with my sheer presence. My mother did not buy this penthouse. She never paid a single cent toward my rent, my lifestyle, or my business. I bought this penthouse with my own liquid capital 5 years ago. I put it in a corporate holding company for tax purposes and privacy. Preston swallowed hard, a bead of cold sweat rolling down his temple. Fine, he stammered, his voice cracking terribly. So you own the apartment. You tricked her into giving you the startup capital to buy it. It does not matter. I will still drag you into probate court and prove you embezzled funds from her estate to fund your little holding company. I let out a sharp, genuine laugh that bounced off the marble walls. My little holding company, I repeated, savoring the absolute destruction of his ego. Preston, look at the final page of that document. Look at the schedule of assets assigned to Obsidian Holdings. His trembling fingers fumbled with the pages until he reached the back of the packet. He stared at the detailed list of properties, his eyes widening in pure, unadulterated horror. "You see, Preston, I do not just own this penthouse," I whispered, leaning in close enough for him to smell my expensive perfume. "My investment firm Obsidian Holdings owns this entire 50-story luxury high-rise. I own the ground you are standing on. I own the private elevator you are not allowed to use. I own the service elevator you snuck up here in. I own the residential leases of all 200 wealthy tenants below us. My mother never subsidized my life, Preston. I am a silent partner in over a dozen major tech acquisitions in Silicon Valley. I am worth more than you, your law firm, and your entire racist bloodline combined." The sheriff took a large step away from Preston, suddenly realizing he had been dragged into a massive fraudulent mess by a desperate man. "Mr. Hayes," the sheriff said, his voice now dripping with heavy irritation, "you brought me out here under false pretenses. You swore you had verified the executor rights to this specific property. This is a highly illegal attempted eviction. You are lucky Mrs. Hayes is not pressing immediate charges against you for harassment and filing false police reports." Preston looked like he was going to vomit right there on my custom welcome mat. His entire worldview, his deeply ingrained belief in his own superiority over a black woman he deemed inferior, had just been violently shattered into a million tiny, unrecoverable pieces. He clutched the folder, breathing heavily, his eyes darting frantically around the hallway, as if looking for an escape route from his own humiliation. I reached out and snatched my corporate documents back from his sweaty hands. "You came to my door to throw me out on the street," I said, my voice cold and hard as steel. "You thought you could use your fake white privilege and your cheap law degree to bully me into submission. You thought I was a weak target because I do not broadcast my bank account balance on Instagram like your desperate, pathetic wife. You made a very critical error today, Preston. This is not over." He hissed, his voice a pathetic, raspy whisper. He tried to pull his jacket seat, desperately clinging to whatever shreds of dignity he had left. "You are hiding assets. I will subpoena every single financial record you have. I will rip your little holding company apart in federal court. I will sue you for every single penny you have and take this entire building from you. You hear me, Zuri? You are nothing. You are going to lose everything." I smiled, a slow, terrifying smile that made him take another step backward. "I strongly encourage you to sue me, Preston," I challenged him. "Please bring your cheap discount legal strategies into a federal courtroom against my corporate defense team. I would absolutely love to destroy you on public record. But you and I both know you cannot afford the filing fees. You cannot even afford the gas money it took to drive here today." I turned to the sheriff, completely dismissing Preston's existence. "Officer, please escort this trespasser out of my building. If he or his wife ever set foot on this property again, I want them immediately arrested for criminal trespassing." "Yes, ma'am," the sheriff said, nodding respectfully. He grabbed Preston by the bicep, his grip firm and unforgiving. "Let us go, Mr. Hayes. You have wasted enough of the county's time today." Preston did not fight back. He let the sheriff pull him toward the service elevator, his shoulders slumped in absolute defeat. He turned back to look at me one last time, his face twisted in a mixture of pure hatred and deep sinking terror. He knew he had just kicked a sleeping bear, and he was completely unprepared for the teeth. I stood in the doorway and watched the metal elevator doors slide shut, cutting off his miserable face from my view. The hallway returned to its perfect, serene silence. I walked back inside my beautiful penthouse and closed the heavy oak door, locking it securely. My phone vibrated in my pocket with a notification from my wealth manager, David. He was confirming that my trap regarding the commercial land sale was perfectly primed and waiting for Preston's next desperate move. I walked over to my bar cart and poured myself a glass of expensive red wine, taking a slow, savory sip. Preston wanted a war over real estate and money. He had absolutely no idea he had just brought a butter knife to a nuclear battlefield, and I was going to make sure the fallout burned his entire life to the ground. I set my wine glass down on the marble counter as my phone screen lit up with an urgent notification. It was an alert from the anonymous social media monitoring account I used to keep tabs on my sister. Sienna had just gone live on Instagram. I walked back into the living room where my mother was resting and cast the video directly to the massive flat-screen television mounted on the wall. "We need to see what narrative she is spinning," I told my mother quietly. Sienna appeared on the screen looking absolutely tragic. She had completely stripped away her usual heavy makeup, leaving her face looking pale and blotchy. She was wearing a simple black turtleneck, deliberately chosen to make her look fragile and deep in mourning. She sat in the poorly lit corner of her own living room, clutching a crumpled tissue. The viewer count skyrocketed within seconds as Atlanta high society tuned in to watch the drama unfold. Sienna started crying the moment the camera turned on. They were perfect crocodile tears rolling down her cheeks on command. She sniffled and looked directly into the lens. To all my friends and followers, she began, her voice trembling with manufactured grief. "I am coming to you today with the heaviest heart imaginable. Last night, my beautiful, beloved mother Brenda passed away suddenly from a massive heart attack." My mother gasped from the sofa, watching her oldest child lie to tens of thousands of people without a single ounce of hesitation. Sienna wiped her eyes and continued her Oscar-worthy performance. "My mother's illness caught us completely by surprise," she lied through her teeth. "Her medical bills from the private facility were astronomical, and because her death was so sudden, we were forced to arrange an emergency cremation to abide by hospital protocols. Preston and I are drowning in her massive medical debts, and we want to give her the beautiful memorial service she truly deserves. But her accounts were completely drained." Sienna paused, taking a deep, shuddering breath, burying her face in the tissue for dramatic effect. "So I have set up a GoFundMe campaign. The goal is $500,000. Anything you can give will help us save our family from financial ruin and honor my mother's legacy. My younger sister Zuri is completely estranged and unable to contribute a single penny, so the entire burden has fallen on Preston and me." The donations started rolling in immediately. Atlanta elite loved a tragedy, especially one involving a prominent wealthy family. Socialites, local politicians, and wealthy housewives were dropping $5,000 and $10,000 at a time. The progress bar on the campaign shot up to $100,000 within the first 20 minutes. They were flooding the comment section with prayers and condolences, praising Sienna for being such a strong, devoted daughter. User after user commented on how brave she was and how terrible it was that her younger sister had abandoned the family during such a dark time. My mother could not watch anymore. She turned her face away from the screen, her expression twisting into a mask of pure revulsion. "Turn it off, Zuri," she whispered, her voice thick with disgust. "I cannot stomach another second of her lies. She is using my supposed death to fund her luxury lifestyle." I muted the television, but kept the campaign page open on my laptop to track their digital fraud in real time. "They are getting greedy," I said, pacing across the spacious living room. $500,000 is a massive target for a simple memorial and fake medical bills. This proves they are desperate for untraceable cash, right this very second. I opened my encrypted communication channel and contacted my lead private investigator, Marcus. I had kept his corporate espionage firm on retainer for exactly this kind of high-stakes situation. "Marcus," I typed quickly, ignoring my usual pleasantries. "Preston and Sienna just launched a massive fraudulent crowdfunding campaign. Preston also tried to evict me today under false pretenses. They are moving incredibly fast and acting completely unhinged. I need that full, comprehensive financial background check on Preston Hayes right now. What exactly is he hiding?" The wait was excruciating, but I knew my team was the absolute best in the business. They had access to deep financial databases, dark web forums, and offshore banking registries that local law enforcement did not even know existed. An hour later, my encrypted server chimed with an incoming video call. It was Marcus. I took the call in my soundproof home office, ensuring my mother could not hear the potentially disturbing details of how deeply her son-in-law had compromised their safety. Marcus appeared on the screen looking incredibly grim. "Zuri," he said, skipping the introductions entirely. "Your brother-in-law is not just a racist, arrogant lawyer. He is a dead man walking." I pulled his entire financial history for the past 5 years and hacked into his private encrypted messaging apps. Preston has a catastrophic gambling addiction. He has been bleeding money into offshore sports betting syndicates and high-stakes underground poker games in Miami and Atlanta for years. How bad is it? I asked, leaning forward in my ergonomic leather chair. It is worse than bad, Marcus replied, typing something on his end to send a massive file dump to my secure server. He owes roughly $4 million to a very violent local criminal syndicate. These are not credit card companies, Zuri. These are brutal loan sharks who break legs and disappear people for a living. The payments were due 3 weeks ago. They have been sending associates to his law firm to intimidate him in the parking garage. But that is not all, Marcus continued, his voice dropping lower. Preston has been actively embezzling money from his own clients' trust accounts to try and cover the gambling losses. He thought he could win it back and replace the funds before anyone noticed. The State Bar Association caught wind of the severe discrepancies last month. They are currently running a shadow investigation. He is mere weeks away from being publicly disbarred and indicted for stealing millions in client funds. His career is completely over and his life is in actual physical danger from the syndicate. I sat back in my chair, the puzzle pieces finally snapping together perfectly. That is why they needed my mother dead, I murmured, staring at the blank wall of my office. They needed her commercial real estate to sell for a massive cash payout, so Preston could pay off the loan sharks before they killed him, or the state bar threw him in federal prison. The GoFundMe is just a quick, desperate cash grab to hold the syndicate over until the major land sale clears. Exactly, Marcus confirmed, nodding grimly through the screen. They are backed into a corner with wild animals snapping at their heels. They will do absolutely anything to get their hands on liquid capital right now. They do not care who they have to step on to survive. Thank you, Marcus, I said, a cold, hard satisfaction settling deep in my chest. Keep monitoring the GoFundMe account. Track every single penny that goes in and flag the account for wire fraud with the federal authorities, but tell your contacts to delay the actual freeze until I give the absolute final signal. I want them to think they have successfully secured the money before we rip it entirely away from them. I ended the call and walked back out to the living room. My mother was looking out the floor-to-ceiling window, her posture rigid and unyielding. She had survived the initial heartbreak of her daughter's betrayal and was now operating on the same frequency of cold, calculating vengeance that I was. "What did you find out?" she asked without turning around to look at me. I sat beside her on the velvet sofa. "Preston owes millions of dollars to the local mob," I explained bluntly, sparing her none of the harsh reality. "He has been stealing from his legal clients to fund a massive gambling addiction. He is about to be disbarred and possibly killed by the people he owes money to. Sienna is entirely complicit in covering it up. They faked your death because selling your prime commercial land is the only way Preston avoids a concrete grave." My mother did not gasp. She did not cry. She simply nodded slowly, taking in the pathetic reality of the daughter she had raised and the man she had welcomed into her family. Sienna always wanted the lavish lifestyle, but she never wanted to put in the actual work, my mother said, her voice devoid of any maternal warmth. She chose a man who looked good in an expensive suit, but had absolute rot inside his soul. They deserve exactly what is coming to them. They are going to try to sell the land fast, I told her, pulling up my laptop again to check the real estate listings. Preston cannot wait for a standard commercial real estate closing. Those take months of due diligence and inspections. He needs a cash buyer right now, today or tomorrow. He will sell it at a massive discount just to get the liquid capital in his hands immediately. My mother turned to look at me, a sharp, predatory glint in her eyes. "And when he does," she said, her voice completely steady. "And when he does," I smiled, my reflection catching in the dark screen of my computer. "I will be the one waiting on the other side of the table in the shadows, ready to take it all." The very next morning, my predictions manifested into reality with absolute precision. Preston was moving with the reckless speed of a man who knew his time was running out. My lead investigator, Marcus, had tapped into the commercial real estate dark networks, where desperate brokers quietly shopped off market properties to avoid public scrutiny. Sure enough, there it was. My mother, massive $20 million downtown commercial block, was listed for a measly $12 million. It was a complete fire sale, an all-cash deal requiring a closing within 48 hours. In the commercial real estate world, moving a property of that magnitude in 2 days was virtually unheard of unless the seller was facing imminent destruction. I sat at my massive oak desk in the home office of my penthouse, watching the digital listing populate on my encrypted monitor. My mother stood behind me, her arms crossed over her chest, looking at the screen. $12 million, she scoffed, shaking her head slowly. He is giving away 30 years of my blood, sweat, and tears for pennies just to save his own miserable skin. He is trying to, Mom, I corrected gently, my eyes fixed on the glowing screen. But he is not going to succeed. I picked up my secure phone and dialed David, my wealth manager. David, I said as soon as he answered the line. The bait has been officially dropped. I need you to mobilize Apex Acquisitions immediately. Apex Acquisitions was a newly formed, limited liability company I had created entirely in the shadows. It was registered in Delaware, structured specifically to obscure the identity of its managing partners. On paper, it looked like a standard aggressive investment group, flush with foreign capital, looking to buy up undervalued Atlanta real estate. In reality, it was just me sitting in my penthouse holding the absolute financial power to crush my arrogant brother-in-law. David moved with the ruthless efficiency I paid him for. Within 15 minutes, an aggressive all-cash offer was submitted through a proxy broker directly to Preston. The terms were incredibly simple. $12 million liquid cash transferred immediately upon receipt of the signed digital deeds and the verified executor documents. No physical inspections required. No lengthy due diligence periods. No environmental impact studies. Just sign the papers and take the money. For Preston, this offer must have looked like a literal miracle sent straight from heaven. He was drowning in syndicate debt. His knees were about to be broken, and suddenly a faceless investment group was handing him a massive lifeline with 0 questions asked. He swallowed the hook instantly. Marcus was actively monitoring Preston's digital footprint and sent me a live update. Preston just canceled all his afternoon client meetings, Marcus reported through the secure chat channel. He is sitting in his downtown law office right now, frantically preparing the transfer documents. He is completely bypassing standard probate court procedures because he knows the death certificate is entirely forged. He is using a fake power of attorney document he backdated to before your mother's supposed death. I read the message aloud to my mother. She closed her eyes, taking a deep breath to steady herself against the profound sickness of the betrayal. He is really going to do it, she whispered. He is going to steal my land and pretend I gave him the legal right to do so. He is sealing his own federal indictment, I reminded her, pulling up the digital tracking software my team had deployed. You see, Preston thought he was just being a clever local lawyer pulling a fast one on the Fulton County Property Registry. But by structuring Apex Acquisitions as an out-of-state entity registered in Delaware and processing the transaction through secure servers based in California, I was elevating his little local scam into a massive federal nightmare. When you commit fraud using local banks and local properties, the state handles it. But the absolute second Preston transmitted those forged legal documents across state lines using the internet, he was committing federal wire fraud. And when he requested the hard copies of the final deeds to be shipped via the Postal Service to our Delaware proxy address, he was committing federal mail fraud. These were not simple state-level misdemeanors that he could golf buddy his way out of. These were class of federal felonies, investigated by the Federal Bureau of Investigation and prosecuted by the United States Department of Justice. Each count carried a maximum sentence of 20 years in federal prison. We sat in the quiet luxury of my office, watching the digital transaction platform refresh in real time. My team had set up a secure viewing portal so we could watch Preston execute the documents, stroke by stroke. It was like watching a train crash in extreme slow motion. At exactly 2:14 in the afternoon, the first document populated in the signing queue. It was the primary commercial deed transfer. My mother leaned over my shoulder, her breathing shallow as she watched the cursor blink on the screen. We waited in heavy silence. Then it happened. A digital signature materialized at the bottom of the document. It was a perfect forgery of my mother's signature executed by Preston hand, using a digital stylus. "He just signed my name!" My mother gasped, her voice trembling with a mixture of horror and deep rage. "That absolute monster just signed my name while assuming I am locked in a freezer waiting to be burned to ashes." I did not say a word. I just kept my eyes locked on the screen. The next document appeared. It was the fraudulent power of attorney, claiming Preston had full legal rights to liquidate Brenda Hayes' commercial assets. Another digital signature appeared. Then came the executor agreements, the tax waivers, the liability releases. Preston was moving fast, clicking through the pages with the desperate speed of a man trying to outrun a bullet. He had absolutely no idea who was sitting on the other side of that digital portal. He probably pictured a room full of greedy white male investors in tailored suits, eager to capitalize on a distressed property sale. He never in a million years would have imagined that the buyer was the very same black woman he had just tried to illegally evict from her own penthouse. The same woman he called a freeloading failure. The same woman he believed was entirely beneath his level of high society excellence. As the final document received its forged signature, a green checkmark illuminated the center of my monitor. The transaction was officially bound by contract. Now came the money. David, my wealth manager, initiated a secure call. "The documents are executed, Zuri." David reported, his tone entirely professional. "Preston Broker is requesting the immediate wire transfer of the $12 million to a domestic holding account controlled by Preston Law Firm." I paused for a fraction of a second, letting the immense weight of the moment settle over me. $12 million was a massive amount of liquid capital even for me. Sending it into the bank account of a man who was actively trying to destroy my family felt deeply unnatural. But I knew exactly how the trap had to work. The crime of wire fraud is not truly complete until the money actually crosses the federal wires. I needed the funds to hit his account so the federal paper trail would be absolutely undeniable. "Send it," I commanded, my voice cold and hard. "Authorize the wire transfer immediately." "The funds are away," David confirmed. I opened a secondary window on my monitor, bringing up the banking dashboard that Marcus had covertly accessed. We watched the progress bar load as the massive digital fortune bounced from my offshore trust to the Delaware LLC, and finally into the domestic account, controlled by Preston Hayes. The balance on Preston account skyrocketed from a pathetic negative balance to $12 million in the blink of an eye. "He has the money," my mother whispered, sinking into the leather armchair beside my desk. She looked physically ill. "He actually did it, Zuri. He stole my life's work and he got away with it." "He did not get away with anything, Mom," I promised, turning to look her directly in the eyes. "He just swallowed the poison. Now we simply wait for it to stop his heart." Marcus chimed back into the secure chat. "Preston is moving the money," Marcus typed rapidly. "He is not even waiting for the funds to fully settle. He is already slicing the $12 million into smaller chunks and wiring it out to multiple offshore accounts connected to the gambling syndicate. He is paying off the loan sharks right now." I smiled a slow, terrifying smile. "Let him pay them," I said aloud, knowing Marcus could read my responses on the screen. "Let him completely drain the account." You see, this was the most beautiful part of my entire strategy. Preston believed he was finally... He believed he had successfully navigated the most dangerous crisis of his life. He was sitting in his fancy downtown office right now, probably loosening his silk tie and pouring himself a glass of extremely expensive scotch. He thought he had saved his kneecaps, his law license, and his arrogant, luxurious lifestyle. He probably thought he was a complete genius. But Preston was an incredibly stupid man. He did not realize that by wiring those stolen funds directly to known criminal syndicates, he was adding international money laundering to his growing list of federal offenses. He was taking money acquired through mail and wire fraud and using it to fund organized crime. He was transforming himself from a sleazy local lawyer into a priority target for the Federal Bureau of Investigation Organized Crime Division. Marcus provided continuous live updates as the afternoon stretched into the early evening. Preston sent $4 million to the Miami syndicate. He sent $2 million to an offshore sports betting ring in Costa Rica. He took another million and paid off the immediate debts he owed to his own clients. Trust accounts desperately trying to hide his embezzlement before the State Bar Association audit hit next week. Within 3 hours, the $12 million was completely gone. Preston account balance returned to zero. He is tapped out, Marcus reported. The money has been completely dispersed. The property deed is now legally registered to Apex Acquisitions. The trap is fully closed, Zuri. I let out a long, slow breath, feeling the intense adrenaline begin to fade into a deep, hollow satisfaction. I turned to my mother, who was still staring at the computer screen, watching the digital footprint of her treacherous son-in-law. It is done, I told her softly, reaching out to squeeze her hand. The commercial property is perfectly safe. It is legally owned by my holding company, so Sienna and Preston can never touch it again. We can quietly transfer the deed back into your name whenever you are ready. My mother looked at me, her eyes shining with unshed tears. She squeezed my hand back, her grip surprisingly strong. You bought my own property back for me, she said, her voice thick with emotion. You spent $12 million of your own money to save my legacy from that monster. I would spend every single penny I have to protect you, Mom, I answered honestly. They underestimate both of us. They thought because you were an older Black woman, you were vulnerable and easily disposable. They thought because I kept my head down and minded my own business, I was weak and broke. They relied entirely on their own arrogant prejudices to carry out this scam. And those exact prejudices are what just destroyed them. What happens now? She asked, wiping a stray tear from her cheek. Now I smiled, leaning back in my chair and looking out the window as the sky over Atlanta began to darken into a deep, bruised purple. Now we let them celebrate. We let them think they have successfully pulled off the perfect crime. Sienna is probably out shopping for designer funeral dresses right now, using the GoFundMe scam money. Preston is probably sleeping soundly for the first time in months, believing his gambling debts are completely erased. We let them climb to the absolute highest peak of their delusion, because the higher they climb, the more devastating the fall will be when we finally rip the ground out from under their feet. I opened my email client and drafted a highly secure, heavily encrypted message to a contact I had at the Department of Justice. I attached the complete digital dossier Marcus had compiled, the forged electronic signatures, the fake power of attorney, the wire transfer logs to the criminal syndicates, and the undeniable proof of money laundering across state lines. I hit send, watching the progress bar zip across the screen as the evidence packet vanished into the federal servers. Tomorrow they were hosting the lavish fake memorial service at the country club. Tomorrow, Preston planned to stand on a stage and publicly humiliate me one final time by reading a forged will that cut me out of the family forever. He planned to hand me a pathetic little check and tell me to leave Atlanta so I would stop ruining his pristine image of Black excellence. I closed my laptop, running my hand over the smooth metal casing. I was going to attend that memorial service. I was going to let Preston stand on that stage and act like a king. I was going to let Sienna cry her fake crocodile tears for all her wealthy friends. And then I was going to burn their entire kingdom to the ground, completely, utterly, and permanently. The shadow transaction was finished, but the real reckoning was just about to begin. The morning of the fake memorial service arrived with a heavy gray sky pouring rain over the Atlanta streets, as if the city itself was trying to wash away the absolute filth my sister and her husband had created. I woke up early, leaving my mother resting in the guest suite of my penthouse. I walked into the kitchen to pour myself a fresh cup of espresso. That is when the assault officially began. My secure personal cell phone, which I only gave to a select few family members, started vibrating across the marble countertop. It buzzed once, then twice, then it became a continuous aggressive hum that threatened to shake the device right off the edge of the island. I picked it up and stared at the screen. I had 73 missed calls and 42 new voicemails. The extended family had finally received their marching orders from Sienna. Sienna must have spent her entire evening calling every single aunt, uncle, and cousin in our sprawling family tree, crying her fake tears, and spinning a narrative of absolute victimhood. She painted herself as the heroic, grieving daughter who was desperately trying to scrape together pennies to honor our mother, while painting me as the heartless, estranged failure who refused to contribute a single dime to the funeral costs. I took a sip of my dark espresso and pressed play on the first voicemail. The voice of my Aunt Clarice filled the quiet kitchen. Clarice was my mother's oldest sister, a woman whose entire personality revolved around her church attendance and her desperate need to be seen as upper class. "Zuri, you absolute disgrace of a daughter!" Clarice shrieked through the speaker, her voice dripping with venom. "I cannot believe you have the sheer audacity to ignore your own sister during a time like this. Sienna is drowning in debt, trying to give your mother a proper homegoing, and you cannot even drop $100 into her GoFundMe account. You are a selfish, ungrateful little girl. Your mother was ashamed of you when she was alive, and she is surely weeping in heaven right now, looking down at your pathetic behavior. Do not even think about showing your face at the country club today." I did not flinch. I simply tapped the screen and saved the audio file directly to my encrypted server. Next message. This one was from my Uncle Jerome. He was a retired mid-level corporate manager who loved to use phrases about Black excellence to justify his rampant classism and overwhelming credit card debt. "Zuri, it is Uncle Jerome. I just got off the phone with Preston. He told me how you acted when he tried to legally secure your mother's estate. You should be on your knees thanking that white man for stepping up to handle the legal burdens of this family. You have always been a massive disappointment, but this is a new low even for you. Sienna is out here carrying the entire weight of our family legacy, while you hide in your little apartment avoiding responsibility. We are all contributing to the funeral fund. If you had any dignity left, you would empty whatever pathetic savings you have and wire it to Preston immediately. You sicken me." Save next message. It went on like this for nearly an hour. Cousin after cousin, aunt after aunt. People who had not spoken to my mother in months were suddenly acting like grieving martyrs, willing to verbally crucify me to prove their loyalty to the golden couple of Atlanta. They praised Sienna for her strength and her elegant grace. They praised Preston for his supposed legal brilliance and his generosity in handling the complex estate issues. They tore into my character, my career choices, and my financial status with an absolutely brutal joy. It was incredibly revealing to listen to their true feelings. For years, they had offered me fake, polite smiles while silently judging me for not wearing the latest designer labels or driving a leased luxury car like my sister. Now that they thought my mother was dead and my sister was inheriting a $20 million empire, they were finally letting their masks slip entirely. They wanted to secure their places in Sienna, wealthy new reality, and they were using my character assassination as their entry ticket. I heard soft footsteps behind me. My mother walked into the kitchen, her face drawn and pale. She had woken up and heard the last few voicemails playing through the speaker. She stood near the refrigerator staring at the phone as if it were a venomous snake. "Was that your Aunt Clarice?" my mother asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, Mom," I answered gently, turning off the speaker and setting the phone down. "And Uncle Jerome and Cousin Devin and Aunt Beatrice. They have all left dozens of messages since midnight. Sienna clearly gave them a very compelling performance about my refusal to fund your fake funeral." My mother walked over and sat heavily on one of the velvet bar stools. She looked completely devastated, not by her fake death, but by the absolute hypocrisy of her own siblings. "Clarice has not called me to ask about my health in 6 months," my mother said, her eyes filling with a profound sadness. "Jerome borrowed $10,000 from me last year and stopped answering my calls when it was time to pay it back. But now that they think Sienna has my money, they are suddenly the most devoted family members on the planet. They are treating you like garbage to earn favor with a thief." "This is exactly why we had to let this play out, Mom," I told her softly. "If we had just called the on the first night, you would have never seen who these people truly are. You would have spent the rest of your life hosting holiday dinners for relatives who would happily watch your younger daughter be destroyed just to stay close to Sienna money." My mother gripped the warm mug, her sadness slowly hardening into the same cold, calculating anger that was driving my every move. Save every single one of those messages, Zuri. She commanded, her voice completely steady now. I want a record of exactly what they said to you when they thought you were defenseless. Already done, I smiled, tapping the side of my phone. They are securely stored in the cloud. They are currently providing us with the absolute perfect audience for today's memorial service. The relentless buzzing of my phone started again. It was a text message from Sienna. I opened it and read it aloud for my mother to hear. All the aunts and uncles are asking where you are, Zuri. Sienna wrote, her words dripping with fake concern. It is honestly so embarrassing for me to have to explain to our prominent guests that my own sister is too broke and too bitter to attend her mother memorial. Preston said if you show up, he will have the country club security arrest you for trespassing. Please just stay home and spare us the humiliation of your presence. The family has already agreed we are cutting you out completely after today. She is trying to ensure you do not show up. My mother observed, analyzing the text with a sharp eye. She knows that if you attend, people might ask you uncomfortable questions about the estate that she cannot answer. She wants to control the entire narrative without any interference from you. Exactly, I nodded, which is why I have to make her believe that her intimidation tactics are actually working. If she thinks I am terrified and broken, she will let her guard down completely. She will walk into that country club feeling like an absolute queen. I picked up my phone and drafted a carefully constructed reply. I needed to sound defeated, insecure, and totally desperate. I needed to feed her massive ego so she would swell up with pride right before I popped the balloon. Sienna, please. I typed, my fingers flying across the screen. I am so sorry about the money. I just do not have anything to give right now. My rent is due and I am struggling. Please do not let Preston have me arrested. I just want to come say goodbye to Mom. I promise I will sit in the back and I will not speak to anyone. Please just let me in the doors. I hit send and waited. Less than a minute later, the reply came through. Fine, Sienna responded, the absolute arrogance radiating from the text. You can come, but you sit in the very back row near the service doors. Do not speak to my friends. Do not speak to Preston legal colleagues. Do not eat the catered food because you did not pay for it. If you cause a single scene, Preston will have you thrown out in handcuffs. Dress appropriately for once in your life. I let out a sharp laugh and tossed the phone onto the counter. The trap was perfectly set. She had just explicitly invited me to the slaughterhouse thinking I was the lamb. She had absolutely no idea she had just opened the gates for the butcher. My mother looked at me, a fierce, proud smile breaking through the exhaustion on her face. What are you going to wear to a fake funeral? She asked. Something incredibly expensive, I replied, walking toward my master bedroom suite. Something that lets every single hypocrite in that room know exactly who they are dealing with before I burn their entire social standing to ashes. I spent the next 2 hours preparing myself for the ultimate confrontation. I did not want to look like the grieving broken sister Sienna desperately wanted me to be. I wanted to look like the apex predator of the Atlanta financial sector. I pulled a sleek, tailored black designer dress from my extensive closet. It was impeccably cut, modest enough for a memorial, but radiated pure, unadulterated wealth. I paired it with simple but blindingly authentic diamond stud earrings and my favorite black designer pumps. My hair was pulled back into a flawless, sleek bun, leaving my face completely exposed and unbothered. When I walked back into the living room, my mother gasped softly. You look like a billionaire, Zuri. She whispered, her eyes shining with pride. You look like you own the entire city. Today, Mom, I smiled, grabbing my structured leather handbag. I actually do. My mother reached out and grabbed my hand, squeezing it tightly. Destroy them, Zuri, she said, her voice completely devoid of mercy. Do not leave a single piece of their fake lives intact. They wanted a show today. Give them a show they will never, ever forget. I kissed her forehead and walked out of the penthouse. My private driver was waiting in the secure underground garage. The black sports utility vehicle pulled out onto the rain-slicked streets of Atlanta, heading toward the most exclusive country club in the state. During the drive, my phone continued to vibrate with incoming messages from the extended family. Aunt Clarice sent another text telling me to use the service entrance so I would not embarrass Sienna in front of the local politicians who were attending. Cousin Malik sent a message mocking my career, asking if I needed to borrow a suit from his girlfriend so I would not look homeless at the club. I read every single message in total silence, letting their cruelty fuel the cold fire burning in my chest. They thought they were a part of Sienna inner circle. They thought by attacking me they were securing their access to the $20 million estate they believed Sienna was about to inherit. They were blind, greedy fools who had hitched their wagon to a sinking ship. As my driver pulled up to the gated entrance of the sprawling country club, I saw the line of luxury vehicles waiting for the valet. Sienna and Preston had clearly spared no expense using the fraudulent GoFundMe money to throw the most lavish party possible under the guise of a memorial service. There were luxury sports cars, imported sedans, and black town cars dropping off the absolute elite of Atlanta high society. The rain had stopped, leaving the air thick and heavy with humidity. I stepped out of the vehicle, declining the valet service and instructing my driver to wait exactly where he was. I adjusted the collar of my designer dress, smoothed my hands over the flawless fabric, and walked toward the grand double doors of the club. I could feel the heavy stares of the country club staff and the early arriving guests as I walked through the lobby. They did not recognize me, but they recognized the power in my stride and the undeniable quality of my attire. I was not slinking in through the service entrance. I was walking straight through the front doors with my head held high, completely ready to face the firing squad. The relentless attacks from my relatives all morning had designed a perfect psychological landscape for the afternoon. Every aunt, uncle, and cousin in that ballroom was primed to treat me like absolute garbage. They were ready to hurl insults, sneer at my presence, and worship the ground. Sienna walked on, and that was exactly what I wanted. I needed all of them gathered in one place, their true, ugly natures completely exposed, so that when the hammer finally fell, there would be absolutely no confusion about who deserved to be crushed underneath it. The grand double doors of the Buckhead Elite Country Club swung open before me, revealing a scene that looked absolutely nothing like a memorial service. If I did not know any better, I would have thought I walked into a high society gala or a luxury real estate launch party. The sprawling ballroom was drenched in golden light from massive crystal chandeliers. Waitstaff in crisp white tuxedos glided across the polished hardwood floors carrying silver trays loaded with premium champagne flutes and beluga caviar appetizers. A live jazz quartet was set up in the far corner, playing a smooth, upbeat melody that completely contradicted the supposed tragedy of the occasion. There was no casket. Of course there was not. Sienna and Preston had claimed an emergency cremation to cover up the fact that my mother was currently sitting safely in my penthouse watching Netflix. Instead of a traditional viewing setup, they had commissioned an enormous oil painting of my mother, which was displayed on an ornate golden easel at the center of the room. It was surrounded by tens of thousands of dollars worth of rare white orchids and imported white roses. The floral arrangement alone probably cost more than what some of these guests made in an entire year, and it was all paid for by the fraudulent GoFundMe money Sienna had scammed out of her gullible followers. I stepped into the ballroom and the reaction was instantaneous. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Champagne glasses hovered near open mouths. The elite of Atlanta turned their heads to stare at the family failure who had dared to crash the exclusive gathering. They took in my flawless designer dress, my authentic diamonds, and my completely unbothered posture. They were expecting a broken, weeping mess, dressed in cheap retail clothing, begging for forgiveness. Instead, they got me looking like I could buy the entire country club and turn it into a parking lot. I walked slowly toward the back of the room, exactly where Sienna had ordered me to sit. The whispers followed me like a toxic cloud. People did not even try to hide their disdain. I heard a woman in a designer suit whisper to her husband that I was the ungrateful child who left my sister to shoulder the massive medical debt. I heard an older man mutter that it was a shame my mother's legacy was tarnished by such a massive disappointment of a daughter. I kept my eyes focused straight ahead, my face a mask of absolute calm. Every single whisper, every judging glance was just another log on the fire I was about to ignite. As I reached the back of the room near the service doors, I found a small, isolated table. Before I could even pull out a chair, my Aunt Clarice intercepted me. She was wearing an extravagant black fascinator hat that looked completely ridiculous and holding a glass of expensive red wine. "I specifically told you to use the service entrance, Zuri." Clarice hissed, her voice low but laced with pure venom. "How dare you walk through the front doors acting like you belong here after what you put Sienna through? You have not contributed a single dollar to this beautiful homegoing. You should be thoroughly ashamed of yourself." I looked at Clarice taking in her cheap department store dress, trying to masquerade as high fashion. "The homegoing is stunning, Aunt Clarice," I replied, my voice smooth and perfectly pleasant. "I am sure Sienna spared absolutely no expense. She sacrificed everything for your mother." Clarice snapped, her eyes narrowing. "She and Preston are carrying the entire financial burden of the estate right now." Uncle Jerome stepped up beside Clarice, nodding in aggressive agreement. "You are a disgrace to the Hayes name," Jerome added, pointing a thick finger at me. "Preston has been working around the clock to settle the probate issues and keep the creditors away from the family assets. You need to sit in that corner, keep your mouth shut, and pray that Sienna has enough grace in her heart to forgive you when this is all over." I smiled warmly at both of them, a smile that clearly unsettled them. "You are absolutely right, Uncle Jerome," I said, taking a seat at the isolated table. "Preston has been working incredibly hard on the estate documents lately. I am sure his efforts will be fully recognized by the end of the day." They both scowled at my pleasant response, unable to pick a fight with someone who refused to argue. They huffed and walked away to rejoin the wealthy crowd, eager to distance themselves from the family outcast. I watched them go, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. I was mentally logging every insult, every sneer, every display of blind loyalty to Preston and Sienna. Across the room, I finally spotted the golden couple. Sienna was holding court near the massive portrait of our mother. She was dressed in a custom-tailored black morning gown that looked more ready for a fashion runway than a funeral. She held a delicate lace handkerchief, dabbing at her dry eyes whenever someone wealthy or influential approached to offer their condolences. Preston stood right beside her, playing the role of the stoic, protective husband. He wore a dark designer suit, his arm wrapped securely around Sienna's waist. He looked incredibly smug, shaking hands with local politicians and wealthy business owners, accepting their praise for being such a strong pillar of the community during a family crisis. Watching Preston laugh and sip premium champagne, I felt a cold, hard thrill course through my veins. He was so deeply intoxicated by his own arrogance that he had no idea he was a walking corpse. He thought he had successfully wired $12 million of stolen real estate money to a violent gambling syndicate just yesterday. He thought he had saved his miserable life. He had absolutely no clue that the Federal Bureau of Investigation currently had agents sitting in unmarked vehicles outside the gates of this very country club reviewing the digital evidence packet I had submitted. Suddenly, a group of 4 women broke away from the main crowd and headed directly toward my table in the back. I recognized them immediately. They were Sienna's sorority sisters from her college days, women who had married rich men and spent their entire lives judging other women based on their zip codes and handbag brands. They approached me like a pack of wolves circling a wounded animal. The leader of the group, a woman named Tiffany, stood in front of my table, looking down her nose at me. "Well, if it isn't the runaway sister," Tiffany sneered, crossing her arms. "Sienna told us you might actually show up to beg for a handout." I leaned back in my chair, crossing my legs elegantly. "Hello, Tiffany," I said, my voice dripping with bored amusement, enjoying the free champagne. Tiffany's face flushed an angry red. "Do not act cute with me, Zuri. We all know exactly why you are here. You heard about the commercial real estate and you want a piece of the pie." Sienna is devastated. She has been crying for days, trying to handle the medical bills while you hid in your cheap apartment doing absolutely nothing to help. Another woman in the group chimed in, her voice loud enough for the nearby tables to hear. "You should be begging Sienna for forgiveness on your hands and knees. She is about to inherit a massive empire, and Preston is managing all the legal trusts. If you ever want to see a single dime of your mother money, You need to go over there right now, apologize for being a terrible sister, and hope they have some pity on you. I looked at the four women analyzing their desperate need to perform for Sienna. They were defending a woman who was actively scamming them. Some of these exact women had probably donated thousands of dollars to the fake GoFundMe account just to secure their social standing in Sienna's circle. They were defending a thief who was using their money to buy the caviar they were currently eating. I think I will pass on the apology, I said, picking up a glass of sparkling water from the table. But I do highly recommend the caviar, Tiffany. You should definitely eat as much as you can. After all, you did pay for it with your generous donation to the medical fund. The women gasped, deeply offended by my lack of shame. You are a complete sociopath, Tiffany hissed, leaning closer to the table. Your mother is dead, and all you care about is being bitter and jealous of Sienna's perfect life. You will always be the ugly failure of this family, Zuri. Sienna and Preston are going to make sure you get absolutely nothing. You are going to be entirely cut out of Atlanta high society by tomorrow morning. I took a slow sip of my water, meeting Tiffany's angry gaze with eyes as cold as ice. You are incredibly loyal, Tiffany, I murmured softly. Loyalty is a rare trait. I just hope for your sake you are not legally tied to any of Sienna's recent financial endeavors. The federal government tends to look very harshly on accomplices to wire fraud. Tiffany blinked, her confident sneer faltering for a fraction of a second as she tried to process my words. What the hell are you talking about? She demanded. Nothing. I smiled, a brilliant, terrifying smile. Just thinking out loud. Please go back and enjoy the party. The main event is going to start very soon, and you will want to have a front row seat. The women scoffed, rolling their eyes and marching back toward the center of the ballroom, muttering about my supposed mental instability. I watched them scurry back to Sienna, buzzing like angry bees, eager to report my defiant behavior. Sienna looked over her sorority sister's shoulders and locked eyes with me across the massive ballroom. Her face twisted into a mask of pure disgust. She whispered something to Preston, who turned to look at me as well. Preston's arrogant smirk returned. He lifted his champagne flute in my direction, a silent, mocking toast. He was letting me know that he had won. He was the king of the castle. He had the money, the properties, the social standing, and the power to crush me into the dirt. I did not break eye contact. I did not look away. I slowly raised my glass of sparkling water in return, acknowledging his silent challenge. The air in the ballroom felt suffocating, thick with the heavy perfume of the wealthy guests and the absolute stench of their moral decay. The anticipation in my chest was building to a magnificent crescendo. Every single person in this room had chosen their side. They had chosen the shiny fake illusion of black excellence, built on stolen funds and forged documents. They had happily trampled over my name to secure their proximity to Preston's perceived power. I checked the sleek platinum watch on my wrist. The timing was absolutely perfect. The atmosphere in the room had reached its peak of arrogant celebration. The guests were getting slightly buzzed on the expensive liquor, the jazz band was playing a triumphant tune, and Preston was checking his watch, preparing to take the stage. He was getting ready to deliver the final killing blow. The public reading of the forged will that would officially excommunicate me from the family legacy in front of the entire city elite. I sat perfectly still in my chair near the service doors, watching the spectacle unfold with the detached precision of a predator waiting in the tall grass. My mother was safe. My assets were completely secure. The evidence was fully processed by the federal authorities. The trap had been meticulously built, rigorously tested, and heavily baited with $12 million of my own untraceable cash. Preston handed his empty champagne flute to a passing waiter and straightened his designer tie. He whispered something into Sienna's ear, making her smile, a tragic, beautiful smile for the watching crowd. He stepped away from his wife and began walking slowly, deliberately toward the small, elevated stage at the front of the ballroom. The crowd parted for him, murmuring their respectful condolences and praising his strong leadership during the family crisis. As Preston walked up the short steps to the stage, the jazz quartet respectfully faded out their music. A heavy, expectant silence fell over the massive ballroom. The 200 guests turned their attention to the front, holding their breath, waiting for the grieving son-in-law to speak. I leaned forward in my chair, resting my elbows on the table, my eyes locked entirely on Preston. He stepped up to the microphone, pulling a thick, folded document from the inner pocket of his suit jacket. It was the forged will, the final piece of his delusional masterpiece. The stage was set. The actors were in their places. The audience was captivated. It was finally time for the curtain to drop and for the absolute destruction of Preston and Sienna to commence. I took one last deep breath, savoring the final moments of their fake reality before I shattered it forever. Preston tapped the microphone twice. The soft thud echoed through the massive crystal chandelier ballroom. Every single pair of eyes in the room was fixed on him. He adjusted his posture, projecting the solemn dignity of a man carrying the weight of an entire family legacy. "Thank you all for coming," he began, his voice echoing with practiced grief. His tone was smooth and resonant, perfectly modulated to convey deep sorrow mixed with quiet strength. "Today we gather not just to mourn the sudden tragic passing of Brenda Hayes, but to celebrate a titan of Atlanta commercial real estate, a mother, a visionary, and a pillar of our community." Preston looked out over the crowd of wealthy socialites, business owners, and corrupt family members, making deliberate eye contact with the most influential people in the room. "Brenda built an empire with her bare hands," he continued, his voice trembling just enough to seem genuine. "She represented the absolute best of us. And in her final years, her greatest joy was watching her eldest daughter, Sienna, step up to carry that massive mantle. Sienna sacrificed her own comfort, her own time, and her own peace of mind to ensure her mother was cared for until the very end." I watched Sienna from the back of the room. She was sitting in the front row, dabbing her completely dry eyes with a black lace handkerchief. Aunt Clarice leaned over and rubbed Sienna's shoulder, offering her a comforting nod. The sheer hypocrisy in the room was suffocating. Preston was painting his wife as a martyr while they were actively trying to steal millions of dollars and leave my mother for dead. But as we look to the future, we must also address the painful realities of the present, Preston said, shifting his tone from mourning to a harsh, rigid sternness. "Brenda loved her family fiercely. She believed in loyalty, she believed in presence, and it broke her heart in her final days to see who truly stood by her side and who chose to turn their back on her when she needed them the most." The guests began to murmur. Heads turned slightly toward the back of the room, where I sat completely motionless, in my black designer dress. Uncle Jerome folded his arms, looking back at me with pure disgust. Preston had the entire room eating right out of the palm of his hand. He was setting the stage to make my public execution look like a righteous act of honoring the dead. Because of the sudden nature of her illness, my mother-in-law asked me to formalize her final wishes, just days before she passed, Preston announced, holding up a thick document made of heavy parchment paper. She wanted to ensure her legacy was protected from those who might seek to exploit it. She wanted to guarantee that her hard-earned empire remained in the hands of the daughter who actually showed up. He unfolded the document. The crisp sound of the thick paper snapping open felt unnaturally loud in the silent ballroom. "I, Brenda Hayes, being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare this to be my last will and testament." Preston read the fake legal jargon with absolute confidence. "I hereby revoke all prior wills and codicils. I leave my entire estate, including all commercial properties, liquid assets, holding accounts, and personal belongings, entirely to my eldest daughter, Sienna Hayes, and her husband, Preston. They have been my rock and my salvation in my darkest hours." He paused, letting the magnitude of the wealth transfer sink into the minds of the greedy socialites in the room. Everyone knew Brenda Hayes was worth tens of millions. Hearing that Sienna and Preston were now the sole inheritors of that massive fortune caused a visible ripple of excitement among Sienna's sorority sisters and the opportunistic relatives sitting nearby. Then Preston looked directly at me over the top of the paper. "Regarding my youngest daughter Zuri," he continued, his voice turning sharp and unforgiving, "I leave her absolutely nothing. Zuri has continuously chosen to abandon this family. She has shown zero respect for our values and zero support during my times of medical need. She is hereby legally and formally excluded from any and all inheritance trust funds or family assets. She is no longer considered a beneficiary of the Hayes estate. Audible gasps rippled through the ballroom. Even though the whispers had been circulating all morning, hearing it read, officially from a legal document, was a massive shock to the system of Atlanta high society. People stared at me with open pity and harsh judgment. Tiffany and the other wealthy housewives at the nearby table actually smirked, congratulating each other silently on picking the winning side. Sienna buried her face in her hands, pretending to weep at the tragedy of her broken family. It was a masterclass in psychological manipulation. Preston folded the document and slid it back into the inner pocket of his tailored suit jacket. But he was not finished. The public reading of the fake will was not enough to satisfy his bloated racist ego. He needed to crush me personally. He needed to make me feel as small and pathetic as he always believed I was. He stepped down from the elevated stage. The crowd naturally parted for him, creating a wide, clear aisle straight from the front of the ballroom all the way to my isolated table in the back. He walked with the slow, arrogant swagger of a conqueror. The rhythmic clicking of his expensive leather shoes against the polished hardwood floor sounded like a slow, mechanical countdown. Every single person in the room watched him. They held their breath, waiting to see what the powerful executor was going to do to the disgraced outcast daughter. I did not shrink back in my chair. I sat perfectly upright, keeping my hands folded elegantly on my lap. My face remained a mask of cool, detached observation. I watched him approach, noting the slight sheen of nervous sweat on his forehead that completely betrayed his confident stride. He was terrified deep down, but he was masking it with cruelty. Preston finally reached my table. He loomed over me, trying to use his physical height to intimidate me. The scent of his expensive cologne mixed with the stale sweat of his hidden panic filled the space between us. He looked down at me, his eyes burning with a cruel, triumphant malice. "Well, Zuri," he said, his voice loud enough for the surrounding tables to hear every single word. "I hope you paid close attention to your mother's final wishes. Your free ride is permanently over. The Bank of Brenda is closed, and the locks on the estate are officially changed. You have completely run out of chances to leech off this family." He reached into his inner jacket pocket again and pulled out a slim, rectangular piece of paper. He held it between his fingers, waving it slightly so the nearby guests could see exactly what it was. A personal check. "But Sienna has a much kinder heart than I do," Preston announced, projecting his voice for the eager audience listening in. "Despite your complete refusal to help pay for the medical bills, despite you abandoning your mother in her dying hours, Sienna cannot bear the thought of her own sister ending up completely homeless on the streets of Atlanta." Preston slapped the check down onto the table right in front of my glass of sparkling water. He slid it toward me with a single arrogant finger. $10,000, Preston said, emphasizing the amount, so the sorority sisters nearby would gasp in fake awe at Sienna's generosity. $10,000 of our own personal money. Consider it charity for a lost cause. He leaned down, resting both his hands on my table, bringing his face uncomfortably close to mine. He dropped his voice to a harsh whisper that only I and the closest guests could hear. "Take the money, Zuri. Take the charity and pack up whatever cheap clothes you have in that apartment you are hiding in. I want you out of Atlanta by the end of the week. You are a complete embarrassment to the Hayes name. You are a failure who could never live up to the standards Sienna set. You have nothing. You are nothing. If I ever see your face near my wife or our properties again, I will personally use my legal connections to ruin whatever pathetic life you have left." I looked down at the check resting on the white tablecloth. It was made out to Zuri Hayes in the amount of $10,000 exactly. It was signed by Preston. The irony was absolutely suffocating. He was handing me a $10,000 check from an account that he had completely drained yesterday to pay off violent loan sharks. An account that had only held money because I personally wired $12 million into it from my own offshore trust just to secure his federal indictment. He was trying to buy my dignity using a tiny fraction of the money I had basically handed him to ensure his own destruction. The check was completely worthless because the account was completely empty. It was a piece of garbage, just like the man standing in front of me. The surrounding guests were completely silent, watching to see if I would break down and cry. They wanted me to snatch the check and run out the service doors in absolute shame. Aunt Clarice nodded approvingly from across the room, clearly thinking Preston was being far too generous to a girl like me. Uncle Jerome was actually smiling a cruel, satisfied smile. Sienna watched from the front of the room, her eyes shining with absolute victory. They had done it. They had successfully stripped me of my family, my inheritance, and my dignity in front of the most powerful people in the city. It was the ultimate humiliation engineered to destroy me so completely that I would never dare to show my face in high society again. I slowly lifted my gaze from the worthless check to Preston's face. I looked at the arrogant smirk twisting his lips. I looked at the confidence radiating from his posture. He truly believed he was a god among mortals. He believed his white privilege and his fake legal brilliance had successfully conquered a wealthy black family and left the rebellious daughter entirely in the dust. He thought he had committed the absolute perfect crime and that no one would ever be smart enough to catch him. I did not raise my voice. I did not shed a single tear. I did not tremble or shake. I simply looked at him with the cold, dead eyes of an apex predator watching its prey step willingly into the center of a steel trap. "You really think you thought of everything, Preston?" I whispered, my voice so soft and calm that he had to lean in just a fraction of an inch closer to hear me over the ambient noise of the breathless crowd. "You really think you are the smartest person in this room?" Preston scoffed, a harsh, dismissive sound that echoed his deep-seated prejudice. "I know I am Zuri. I hold the deed. I hold the money. I hold the power. Take the check and leave before I call security to drag you out of here by your hair." I reached out my hand, extending my fingers toward the crisp piece of paper resting on the white tablecloth. Preston's smirk deepened, assuming I was finally submitting to his absolute authority. He stood up straighter, adjusting his suit jacket, ready to turn around and accept the applause of the room for handling the difficult sister with such firm, graceful charity. The tension in the ballroom was so thick it felt like the air itself had turned into solid glass. Everyone was waiting for my final surrender. Everyone was waiting for me to take the money and run away in absolute disgrace. Little did they know the stage was finally perfect. The trap was fully loaded, and the glass was about to shatter into a million tiny unrecoverable pieces. I focused entirely on the small rectangular piece of paper sitting on the pristine white tablecloth, $1,000. A meaningless sum of money printed on a personal check from a bank account that I knew for an absolute fact was currently holding a balance of zero. Preston stood over me, radiating a toxic mixture of arrogant pride and hidden desperation. He honestly believed this piece of paper was his ultimate weapon. He thought handing me this worthless check was the final nail in the coffin of my dignity. He expected me to snatch it up, cry tears of pathetic gratitude, and run out the service doors, while the wealthy crowd clapped for his overwhelming generosity. My Aunt Clarice was already nodding from across the room, her absurd black fascinator hat bobbing up and down as she silently judged my hesitation. Uncle Jerome had a cruel smile plastered across his face, waiting for the family failure to accept her final defeat. Tiffany and the group of superficial sorority sisters leaned in closer, their eyes wide with eager anticipation, hoping to witness my complete public humiliation. I did not reach for the check with trembling fingers. I did not break down into a sobbing mess. I kept my posture perfectly rigid, my spine straight against the back of the chair. I slowly extended my right hand, lifting my arm with deliberate, agonizing slowness. I let my manicured fingertips brush against the crisp edge of the paper. Preston's smirk deepened a fraction of an inch, a smug breath escaping his lips. He thought he had won. He thought his white privilege and his fake legal brilliance had successfully crushed the rebellious black daughter into total submission. I pressed my index and middle fingers firmly into the center of the check, pinning it against the heavy linen tablecloth. With my left hand, I pinched the top right corner. I never once broke eye contact with Preston. I stared directly into his soul, letting him see the absolute lack of fear in my eyes. With a sharp, aggressive motion that echoed surprisingly loud in the breathless silence of the ballroom, I tore the $10,000 check right down the middle. The sharp ripping sound cut through the tense atmosphere like a razor blade. Preston's arrogant smile froze instantly on his face. The muscle in his jaw twitched violently as his brain struggled to process the visual information. Before he could even open his mouth to issue a command or shout an insult, I placed the two torn halves directly on top of each other. I pinched them again and ripped them straight down the middle a second time, destroying his fake signature and his fake charity in one fluid motion. I opened my hand and let the four worthless pieces of paper flutter softly down onto the table, settling like dirty confetti next to my glass of sparkling water. The reaction from the crowd was immediate. The mocking whispers and expectant smiles completely vanished. Aunt Clarice gasped loudly, pressing a dramatic hand to her chest, as if she had just witnessed a horrific crime. Uncle Jerome took a heavy, aggressive step forward, his face twisting into a mask of pure anger. Tiffany and her friends recoiled, looking at me as if I had just lost my entire mind. Preston's face flushed a deep, dangerous shade of crimson. The fake, calm, professional demeanor he had carefully maintained for the wealthy Atlanta crowd completely evaporated, revealing the desperate, violent man hiding underneath. "You stupid, arrogant little failure," Preston hissed, leaning his heavy body over the table, his fists clenched so tightly his knuckles turned a sickly white. "You actually think this is some kind of joke? You think you can disrespect my charity and insult your sister in front of the most powerful people in this city?" He turned his head, looking toward the front of the room where the event staff was standing. "Security!" He bellowed, his voice cracking slightly with unhinged rage. "Security, get over here right now and drag this trespassing trash out of my country club. Throw her out into the street where she belongs." But the security guards did not move an inch. The jazz band in the corner remained completely frozen, their instruments lowered. The entire massive ballroom was suddenly locked in a strange, heavy paralysis. Nobody was looking at me. Nobody was looking at Preston. Every single pair of eyes in the room was fixed on the space directly behind my table, the massive solid oak double doors of the grand ballroom. The main entrance that Sienna had specifically forbidden me from using were beginning to unlock. The heavy brass latches clicked loudly, the mechanical sound echoing through the cavernous, silent space. It was not the discreet, gentle push of a waiter bringing in a fresh tray of expensive caviar. It was not the hurried, hesitant entrance of a guest arriving late to the memorial service. It was the heavy, deliberate, mechanical sound of an absolute force of nature, preparing to breach the perimeter of their fake reality. Preston stopped yelling for security. His eyes darted over my head toward the heavy doors. Sienna, who had been watching my confrontation with Preston with eager anticipation, suddenly stood up from her front row seat. She craned her neck, her hands gripping the lace handkerchief tightly, trying to see what was causing the massive disruption at the main entrance. The tension in the room was no longer about my defiance. It was a collective breath held in pure, unfiltered anticipation. Then the heavy oak doors burst open. They did not just swing open, they were forcefully, violently thrown wide open, slamming against the interior walls with a massive, deafening thud that literally shook the crystal chandeliers hanging from the high ceiling. The bright golden light from the country club hallway spilled into the dim, heavily curated morning atmosphere of the ballroom, cutting through the shadows like a blade. And stepping right out of that golden light, looking like an absolute vengeful deity summoned from the heavens, was my mother. Brenda Hayes walked into her own memorial service. She was not wearing a faded hospital gown. She was not confined to a fragile wheelchair or hooked up to any medical machines. She was certainly not a pile of cold gray ashes, sitting in a cheap emergency cremation urn, like Sienna had told the entire city of Atlanta. My mother was completely, stunningly, undeniably, and radiantly alive. She was draped in a breathtaking floor-length mahogany mink coat that screamed of deep generational wealth and untouchable power. Underneath the heavy coat, she wore a perfectly tailored emerald green designer suit that hugged her strong frame, accentuating her vitality. Authentic vintage diamonds glittered aggressively at her throat and ears, catching the ambient light and throwing sharp sparks across the room. Her hair was flawlessly styled. Her makeup was absolute perfection, and her eyes burned with the brilliant, raging fire of a queen who had returned to find absolute rats sitting on her beloved throne. The reaction in the ballroom was not just simple shock or mild surprise. It was pure, unadulterated primal terror. For a long, horrific second, absolutely nobody breathed. They simply stared at the woman they had supposedly gathered to mourn. The woman whose tragic death they had actively donated over $500,000 to commemorate on a fraudulent internet campaign. The cognitive dissonance in the room was so thick you could choke on it. Then the absolute pandemonium broke loose. An older woman standing near the massive floral arrangement let out a high-pitched, blood-curdling scream, genuinely believing she was witnessing a supernatural event or a literal ghost. A wealthy businessman standing near the open bar dropped his premium champagne flute in pure shock. The delicate crystal glass hit the polished hardwood floor and shattered into 100 tiny pieces, the sharp cracking sound cutting through the air like a gunshot, while the expensive golden liquid spilled and splashed across the floor. Total chaos erupted among the elite guests. The polished veneer of high society completely disintegrated. Aunt Clarice let out a strangled wheezing noise, grabbing her chest and collapsing backward into a padded chair, fanning herself frantically as her eyes rolled back in her head. Uncle Jerome stumbled backward, tripping over his own expensive shoes, his eyes bulging out of his skull as he stared in absolute horror at his living, breathing sister. Tiffany and the superficial sorority sisters shrieked in unison and scrambled away from my table, completely terrified, pushing each other out of the way to escape the impossible reality standing in the doorway. But nothing in that room compared to the catastrophic reaction of the golden couple. Sienna, who had spent the entire morning crying her fake crocodile tears, dabbing her eyes, and accepting the deep sympathy of Atlanta high society, completely broke down physically and mentally. All the color instantly drained from her perfectly contoured face, leaving her looking like a pale, lifeless mannequin. Her eyes stretched so wide they looked like they might tear at the corners. She let out a weird, choked, guttural gasp, a sound born of pure psychological horror and absolute guilt. Her knees simply gave out beneath her. The physical shock was so absolute, so entirely overwhelming, that her legs could no longer support her own weight. Sienna dropped straight down to her knees, hitting the hardwood floor with a heavy, agonizing thud. The impact completely ruined her expensive black designer morning dress, but she did not care. She knelt there, trembling violently, unable to look away from the mother she had eagerly tried to bury for a cash payout. Preston's reaction was even more pathetic and catastrophic. The arrogant, smug lawyer who had just tried to banish me from the city, the man who thought he had outsmarted federal laws and criminal syndicates, completely lost his mind. The exact moment his eyes locked onto my mother, breathing healthy and glaring straight through his soul, his brain completely short-circuited. The terrifying reality of his massive federal crimes, the forged death certificate, the illegal wire transfers across state lines, the fake estate documents, the fake power of attorney, all crashed down on his head in a single crushing tidal wave of realization. He stepped backward away from my table, his hands raised defensively in front of his face, as if trying to physically block an incoming physical blow. He stumbled, his expensive leather shoes slipping wildly on the polished wood. He crashed hard into an empty cocktail table, sending a silver tray of appetizers and glasses flying through the air in a loud, chaotic clatter. He hit the ground hard, scrambling backward on his hands and knees, completely stripped of his fake white privilege and his fabricated legal authority. He looked exactly like the desperate, pathetic, cowardly criminal he truly was, crawling on the floor of the country club. My mother did not say a single word at first. She did not need to. Her sheer physical presence commanded the complete, total submission of every single person in the massive room. She stepped forward, beginning her slow, deliberate walk down the center aisle. She walked past the shattered champagne glass, past the cowering, terrified sorority sisters, past the hyperventilating relatives who had eagerly sold her out and insulted me for a chance at her money. The sea of wealthy guests parted for her, scrambling desperately out of her way as fast as they physically could, pressing themselves flat against the walls and dining tables to avoid her path of destruction. The silence that fell over the room now was not the respectful silence of a morning service. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of absolute judgment and impending doom. I stood up from my chair, slowly smoothing the premium fabric of my black designer dress. I stepped out from behind the isolated table and fell into step exactly 2 paces behind my mother's right shoulder. We walked together down the aisle, the silent billionaire daughter and the powerful matriarch who absolutely refused to die quietly. We moved with perfect synchronized power, presenting a united front of pure, undeniable black excellence, walking straight through the pathetic wreckage of Preston and Sienna fake illusions. The people who had spent the last hour whispering cruel insults about me and telling me to beg for scraps now cast their eyes downward, completely terrified to even look in our general direction. They finally realized with crushing embarrassment that they had spent the entire morning mocking the only person in the room who actually held the real power. We reached the front of the ballroom, where the massive, ridiculous oil painting of my mother stood surrounded by the obscene display of white orchids. Sienna was still on her knees on the floor, sobbing hysterically, now her hands covering her face, unable to bear the immense crushing weight of her own monstrous actions. Preston had managed to drag himself up to a pathetic sitting position, leaning heavily against the base of the small elevated stage. His chest was heaving with panic attacks, and his expensive tailored suit was covered in spilled food and floor dirt. He stared up at my mother, shaking his head back and forth, rapidly muttering the word "impossible" over and over again under his breath like a broken record. My mother did not even look down at Sienna kneeling in the dirt, weeping her fake tears. She did not cast a single glance at Preston's pathetic form, shaking violently against the stage skirt. She walked gracefully and powerfully up the short wooden steps to the elevated platform. The microphone was still sitting perfectly on the heavy brass stand, exactly where Preston had left it, after confidently reading his forged, ridiculous document to the crowd. My mother stepped up to the stand, her luxurious mink coat draped perfectly over her shoulders. She reached out with a steady, unshakable hand, wrapped her manicured fingers around the microphone, and pulled it firmly from the metal stand. She stood at the exact center of the stage, looking out over the 200 terrified, completely silent guests. She let her piercing gaze slowly sweep across the entire room, making absolutely sure every single person present understood that she was completely healthy, entirely coherent, and fully undeniably in charge of her own empire. Finally, she tilted her head and looked straight down at Preston and Sienna, who were utterly broken at the foot of her stage. She brought the microphone to her lips, her voice ringing out through the massive speakers, clear, powerful, and dripping with absolute lethal authority. "My funeral seems to be missing its guest of honor," she said. The silence in the room was absolute. My mother stood on the stage, her presence commanding every single breath in the ballroom. She looked down at Sienna, who was still sobbing hysterically on the floor. "You froze my bank accounts before my body would have even been cold," my mother said, her voice echoing with a terrifying calm. "You canceled my premium health insurance. You paid a corrupt doctor to sign a fake death certificate and left me to die in that facility so you could steal my life's work." The guests gasped, stepping further back. Aunt Clarice looked like she was going to faint again. Uncle Jerome was completely speechless, his mouth hanging open as the reality of his blind loyalty crashed down on him. Tiffany and the sorority sisters began whispering frantically, realizing they had just defended a monster. Preston scrambled to his feet, his expensive suit ruined and his face dripping with nervous sweat. He held his hands up in a desperate attempt to regain control of the narrative. "Brenda, please," he stammered, his voice shaking violently. "This is a massive misunderstanding. I was acting in the best interest of the estate. Everything I did was completely legal. The commercial land sale was finalized yesterday. We have $12 million in liquid cash. The family is completely financially secure. We have the money to take care of everything." That was my cue. I walked up the steps to the stage, standing right beside my mother. I held a thick, heavy folder in my hand. A bright red classified stamp was pressed onto the front cover. I did not hand it to Preston. I raised it high in the air for the entire ballroom to see, and then I slammed it down onto the polished wooden podium with a massive resounding crack that made Preston flinch physically. "You do not have a single penny, Preston," I said, my voice cold and loud, carrying across the silent room. Let us talk about your legal brilliance. Let us break down exactly how you just destroyed your own life in front of Atlanta high society. I looked directly at Sienna, who was looking up at me with wide, terrified eyes. First, your little GoFundMe scam, I announced. You cried on Instagram and begged your wealthy friends to fund your luxury lifestyle while claiming it was for emergency medical debts. My team reported that campaign for wire fraud 3 hours ago. The federal authorities have permanently frozen every single bank account tied to your name, Sienna. The money is gone and you are currently under investigation for felony theft by deception. Sienna let out a horrific wailing sob, collapsing completely onto the hardwood floor. Her sorority sisters, the ones who had just insulted me, looked at her with pure disgust, realizing they had been scammed out of their own money. But Preston was still trying to cling to his delusion. "The land sale is legal," Preston shouted, his voice cracking with pure panic. "The deed is transferred. We sold the commercial property to an out-of-state investment group. I executed the documents myself. The $12 million is real. You cannot take that away." I smiled the cold, terrifying smile of a predator who had finally caught its prey. "You sold the land to Apex Acquisitions." "Preston," I said slowly, letting every single syllable sink into his panicked brain. "An anonymous limited liability company registered in Delaware. Did you ever bother to check who the managing director of that holding company actually is?" Preston stared at me, his eyes darting frantically. His jaw dropped open as the realization hit him like a freight train. "No," he whispered, taking a step backward. "No, that is impossible. You do not have that kind of capital. I am the sole owner and chief executive officer of Apex Acquisitions," I declared, my voice ringing with absolute victory. "You sold my mother commercial property directly to me. The land never left this family. I used $12 million of my own liquid cash to bait your trap, and you swallowed it whole without doing a single background check." Preston began to hyperventilate. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely keep them at his sides. "But the money," he gasped out. "The $12 million is in my firm holding account. I have the cash. It is sitting right there." "You had the cash?" "Preston," I corrected him. "But you are a desperate man with a catastrophic gambling addiction. My private investigators watched you slice up that $12 million and wire it to violent criminal syndicates in Miami and offshore sports betting rings to pay off your massive debts. You emptied the account within 3 hours. You took money acquired through fraud and used it to fund organized crime." The entire ballroom erupted into chaotic whispers. Local politicians and wealthy business owners looked at Preston with absolute horror, realizing the prestigious lawyer they had been associating with was tied to violent loan sharks and criminal syndicates. People began backing away from him, as if he were carrying a deadly plague. "And that brings me to your final fatal mistake," I said, stepping closer to the edge of the stage, looking down at him. "You used a fake power of attorney to sign those electronic documents. You transmitted forged legal deeds across state lines using secure internet servers. In the state of Georgia, that might just be a standard fraud charge. But the second you crossed state lines electronically, you committed federal wire fraud. And when you requested the hard copies to be shipped via the postal service, you committed federal mail fraud." Preston fell to his knees beside his weeping wife. He was completely shattered. His arrogant facade, his white privilege, his fake legal superiority, all of it burned to absolute ashes in a matter of seconds. He put his hands over his face, sobbing uncontrollably, as the reality of his decades-long prison sentence settled over him. He knew he had lost. There was no legal loophole to save him from federal prosecutors. Right on cue, the heavy double doors of the ballroom burst open for the second time that afternoon. But this time it was not a grand entrance by a wealthy matriarch. It was a highly coordinated tactical breach. A dozen federal agents wearing dark suits and tactical vests, clearly marked with FBI across the back, stormed into the country club. They were flanked by local Atlanta police officers. The agents moved with swift, relentless efficiency, completely ignoring the shocked gasps of the wealthy guests. They marched straight down the center aisle, their eyes locked on the pathetic, broken man kneeling at the front of the room. Preston Hayes, a senior FBI agent, announced, his voice booming with absolute federal authority. You are under arrest for federal wire fraud, mail fraud, identity theft, and money laundering. Two agents grabbed Preston by the arms, hauling him roughly to his feet. They kicked his legs apart and slammed him face first against the polished wooden stage. The sharp metallic click of the heavy steel handcuffs locking around his wrists echoed through the silent ballroom. Preston did not fight back. He just wept, sobbing like a broken child, as the agents patted him down and read him his rights in front of every single person he had ever tried to impress. Sienna was screaming, hysterically crawling toward the agents, trying to grab Preston's suit jacket. "Preston, tell them it is a mistake," she shrieked. "Tell them we did not do anything wrong. Tell them to let you go. We are good people, Preston, please. Ma'am, step back right now, or you will be detained for interfering with a federal investigation," another agent warned, pointing a stern finger at my sister. Sienna froze, her hands suspended in the air, her face smeared with ruined makeup and tears. She looked around the room, begging for someone, anyone, to help her. But her wealthy friends just turned their faces away, completely abandoning her. The agents hauled Preston backward, pulling him down the center aisle. The crowd of elite socialites parted for him, but this time it was not out of respect or admiration. They backed away in pure disgust, pulling their expensive clothes tight against their bodies to avoid touching a convicted federal criminal. Uncle Jerome and Aunt Clarice hid their faces behind their hands, completely terrified that the FBI might start questioning the relatives. Tiffany and the sorority sisters were actively recording the arrest on their cell phones, eager to post the downfall of the golden couple on social media. Preston was dragged out the front doors, the red and blue flashing lights of the police cruisers illuminating the rainy Atlanta afternoon outside. The heavy doors swung shut behind him, sealing his fate forever. The flashing red and blue lights of the police cruisers outside the country club painted a surreal, strobing pattern against the massive glass windows of the grand ballroom. The heavy double doors had swung shut behind the federal agents, sealing Preston's fate forever. But the chaotic aftermath inside the room was just beginning to settle into a cold, hard reality. Sienna remained on her hands and knees in the exact center of the polished hardwood floor. Her expensive, custom-tailored black designer morning dress was pooled around her in a wrinkled, ruined mess, completely stained by the spilled champagne and crushed appetizers she had crawled through. Her flawless makeup was entirely destroyed, running down her face in thick, dark tracks of mascara and eyeliner. The room was emptying fast. The very same wealthy socialites and influential politicians who had kissed her cheek and praised her devotion an hour ago were now actively fleeing the scene, terrified that the federal investigators might return to question the guests. Tiffany and the superficial sorority sisters did not even bother offering a single word of comfort to their supposed best friend. Tiffany actually scoffed loudly, muttering to her husband about how she needed to call her platinum credit card company immediately to dispute the fraudulent GoFundMe charge before turning her back and marching briskly out the front doors. Aunt Clarice and Uncle Jerome were moving toward the coat check with desperate, frantic speed, keeping their heads bowed low to avoid making eye contact with anyone. They had attached their entire social identity to Sienna and Preston, and now they were absolutely terrified the authorities might look into their own highly questionable finances. Sienna was entirely, completely alone, surrounded by the literal wreckage of her own staggering arrogance. She slowly turned her tear-stained face toward the elevated wooden stage where my mother and I were standing side by side. Sienna looked absolutely pathetic, stripped of her false confidence, her stolen wealth, and her fake high society armor. She scrambled forward on her hands and knees, not even bothering to stand up, crawling desperately toward the short wooden steps of the stage. "Mom, please!" she sobbed, her voice cracking into a high-pitched, desperate whine that echoed miserably through the rapidly emptying ballroom. "Mom, you have to help me. Preston made me do it. He forced me to go along with the plan because he was terrified of the violent loan sharks. He said they were going to kill him if we did not get the cash today. I did not want to hurt you, Mom. Please, you have to believe me. You have to hire me a defense attorney. My bank accounts are completely frozen and the federal agents are going to arrest me next." My mother looked down at her eldest child with an expression of pure, unadulterated ice. There was absolutely no maternal warmth left in her dark eyes. The profound sickness of the betrayal had completely burned away any lingering affection she held for the daughter who had literally tried to bury her alive for a quick cash payout. My mother slowly descended the wooden steps, the heavy mahogany mink coat sweeping gracefully and powerfully behind her. She stopped just inches away from where Sienna was groveling on the floor. "You are a grown woman, Sienna," my mother said, her voice perfectly calm and completely devoid of any mercy. "You made your choices with your eyes wide open. You chose to freeze my bank accounts before my body would have even been cold. You chose to post a fraudulent video crying fake tears to steal money from your gullible friends. You chose to stand in this room and try to publicly humiliate your sister. Preston did not force you to do any of that. Your own toxic, endless greed forced you to do it. You wanted my $20 million empire without putting in a single day of the 30 years of hard work it took me to build it. And now you get to experience the absolute reality of consequences." Sienna let out a choked, agonizing gasp, reaching her trembling hands out toward my mother. Designer shoes. But my mother stepped back smoothly, completely avoiding her desperate touch. Sienna then turned her weeping, swollen eyes toward me. "Please," she begged, crawling slightly in my direction, her voice reducing to a pathetic whimper. "You have millions of dollars. You bought the commercial land. You have an entire holding company. You can afford to bail me out. You can pay for top-tier corporate lawyers for both of us to fight the federal charges. We are sisters, Zuri. Family is supposed to forgive each other. Please do not let them send me to a federal prison." I looked down at the woman who had spent my entire life trying to make me feel small, the woman who had called me a freeloading failure and an embarrassment to the family name just an hour ago. "Family does not fake death certificates to steal real estate," I said, my voice ringing with cool, absolute finality. "Family does not steal from grieving communities. And I am completely done subsidizing the delusion that we are sisters. You built your entire life on a foundation of lies and stolen money. Now the foundation has entirely collapsed, and you are going to have to learn how to survive in the rubble completely on your own." I turned to my mother, offering her my arm. She took it with a graceful, dignified nod. We did not look back at Sienna. We walked together down the center aisle of the ballroom, leaving the sobbing, broken woman shivering on the floor. The few remaining country club staff members parted for us, bowing their heads in silent respect as we passed. We walked out the front doors of the club, into the fresh, rain-washed air of the Atlanta afternoon. My private driver was waiting right by the curb, holding a large black umbrella to shield us from the light drizzle. We climbed into the plush leather seats of the luxury sports utility vehicle, leaving the toxic wreckage of our past completely behind us without a single ounce of regret. The months that followed were an absolute masterclass in natural consequences. The federal justice system moved with brutal, unforgiving efficiency when dealing with high-profile financial crimes involving mail and wire fraud. Preston was immediately denied bail due to his documented financial connections with violent criminal syndicates and the extreme flight risk he posed. His federal trial was a massive media spectacle in Atlanta, dominating the evening news for weeks. His former prestigious law firm completely turned their backs on him, publicly disavowing his actions to save their own corporate reputation. His high-priced defense attorney could do absolutely nothing against the staggering mountain of digital evidence my investigators had provided to the Department of Justice. The forged electronic signatures, the illegal wire transfers, the blatant money laundering. It was all entirely undeniable and perfectly documented. The federal judge threw the absolute book at him during sentencing. Preston was permanently disbarred, stripped of every legal credential he had ever earned, and sentenced to 25 years in federal prison without the possibility of early parole. His arrogant white privilege and his fake legal superiority could not save him from spending the rest of his adult life in a tiny concrete cell. Sienna's fate was equally devastating, though it took a slightly different path. The federal authorities thoroughly investigated the fraudulent GoFundMe campaign and charged her with multiple counts of felony theft by deception and conspiracy to commit wire fraud. Because she cowardly fully cooperated with the FBI and turned over every single piece of evidence against Preston, she managed to negotiate a plea deal that barely kept her out of a federal penitentiary. But her life as she knew it was completely, permanently over. She was sentenced to 5 years of heavy supervised probation and ordered by the court to pay massive financial restitution to the hundreds of donors she had brazenly scammed. To cover the massive court-ordered restitution, all of her luxury assets were aggressively seized by the federal government. The luxury imported cars, the designer wardrobe, the expensive authentic jewelry. Everything was auctioned off by date to pay back the victims of her fraud. She was forced to move out of her upscale suburban mansion and rent a tiny dilapidated studio apartment in a rough, forgotten neighborhood on the outskirts of the city. With a highly publicized felony fraud conviction on her permanent record, no reputable company in Atlanta would ever hire her. The former high society socialite, who used to sip premium champagne at charity galas, was forced to take a minimum wage job working the overnight shift at a local discount retail store just to meet her basic survival needs. She had to ride the city bus to work every single day because she could no longer afford a vehicle. The extended family scattered like roaches when the kitchen lights turn on. Aunt Clarice and Uncle Jerome never called my secure phone again. They knew I held the audio recordings of their cruel, hostile voicemails, and they were absolutely terrified I would release the audio files to their conservative church congregations and their corporate employers. They stayed entirely out of our lives, completely silenced by their own cowardly hypocrisy and their desperate fear of public exposure. My mother's commercial real estate properties were legally and safely transferred back into her rightful name, the absolute second the federal hold was lifted. The $20 million empire remained completely untouched by the scandal growing in value as the city continued to develop. But she decided she no longer wanted to deal with the daily stress of managing commercial tenants and negotiating property leases. She formally appointed my venture capital firm Apex Acquisitions to manage her entire real estate portfolio, taking a generous percentage of the passive profits to fund her early and extremely comfortable retirement. She officially moved into the private guest wing of my luxury penthouse, deciding she heavily preferred the elevated elite security and the breathtaking panoramic views of the city over living alone in her massive empty suburban house. It was a warm, breezy evening in late September, roughly 6 months after the massive confrontation at the country club. I was sitting out on the expansive private terrace of my top-floor penthouse, wrapped in a soft, imported cashmere shawl. The city of Atlanta stretched out infinitely below me, a glittering, glowing ocean of neon lights and slow-moving evening traffic. The air smelled clean and fresh, completely untainted by the heavy, suffocating perfume of fake relatives or the toxic presence of arrogant, greedy lawyers. The sliding glass door opened softly behind me. My mother stepped out onto the terrace carrying 2 heavy crystal glasses and a newly opened bottle of extremely expensive vintage red wine. She looked incredibly healthy, vibrant, and completely at peace. The heavy stress that had visibly aged her during Sienna's ultimate betrayal had completely melted away, leaving her looking 10 years younger and radiating pure joy. She walked over to the modern outdoor lounge area, poured a generous measure of the dark ruby liquid into each glass, and handed one directly to me with a warm, genuine smile. We sat together in comfortable, companionable silence, watching the city lights flicker and dance against the dark night sky. We did not talk about Sienna or Preston. We did not wonder how they were doing or if they were suffering in their new miserable realities. They had been entirely excised from our lives like a toxic cancerous tumor surgically removed and permanently thrown into the medical incinerator. There was no lingering guilt in our hearts. There was no toxic societal pressure forcing us to forgive and forget for the sake of maintaining a fake, flawless family image. We had completely rejected the generational trauma that tells Black women that blood gives people a free pass to commit horrific abuse and financial fraud. We chose our own peace over their comfort. To the new empire, my mother said softly, raising her crystal glass in the cool evening air. Her voice was deeply peaceful, completely devoid of the sharp defensive edge she used to carry when dealing with the constant demands of the extended family. I clinked my heavy crystal glass against hers, the pure glass ringing out with a clear, beautiful melodic sound that carried gently over the open terrace. To absolute peace, I replied, Taking a slow, savory sip of the rich, complex vintage wine, I looked down at the massive, towering financial district of Atlanta, knowing my strategic investments were quietly growing and my absolute power was firmly cemented in the shadows of the city. I had started this long, grueling journey as the family disappointment, the outcast, rebellious daughter who refused to play by their superficial social rules. I had endured their cruel insults, their snide, passive-aggressive comments, and their blatant disrespect for decades in total silence. But when they finally crossed the ultimate unforgivable line, I did not just defend myself. I systematically dismantled their entire fragile universe, using my own intelligence, my own hidden corporate wealth, and my own absolute refusal to ever be a victim. I had built an impenetrable fortress of success that nobody could ever breach again. The revenge was completely flawless, precisely because it relied entirely on their own massive greed to destroy them. The night sky above the penthouse was endless and perfectly clear. For the first time in my entire life, the future belonged entirely to me, and it was absolutely beautiful. The most powerful lesson from this story is that sharing DNA does not automatically make someone family. Real family is built on a foundation of mutual respect, unconditional support, and genuine loyalty, not manipulation and greed. When toxic relatives cross unforgivable lines, walking away is not an act of surrender. It is the ultimate declaration of self-worth. You do not owe your success, your peace, or your resources to people who only value you when it benefits them. Setting ironclad boundaries and letting greedy people destroy themselves with their own actions is the best way to protect your lasting peace. If this story empowered you, please hit the like button and share how you successfully set boundaries with toxic relatives in the comments below.